Thank you. Okay, I'm recording and we are.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going live. 3, 2, 1.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to join in, and I'll get the program started with a good morning and a welcome. But we see you joining. Hello and welcome to you. Hello, we'll start in a few minutes. We're just giving people some time to join and get themselves set up. I should start in a few minutes, around 9:05. Okay, I think that's about enough time and we should start because we are pressed for time. Good morning and welcome to all of you to the first commercial fiction workshop that Pan Macmillan is hosting. We're so glad you could join us and we're very excited. Unfortunately, due to time and constraints and technical issues, we're not able to all be on video. So you won't all be able to see each other, but you can engage us on the chat and the Q&A function. And our local publishing team is standing by to answer your questions and engage with you in that way. For the panelists and the speakers, please join with your video off and your mic off, and then only switch your video on when it's your turn to speak. We have a very tight program today, so we regret again that we aren't able to say hi to all of you, but it's so nice to have you here. And just to give you a sense of the room and who's joining us, we have our Pan Macmillan team. who will be speaking to you guys throughout the day or the morning, and they will introduce themselves before they start their discussion. We also have some bloggers and influencers who are part of the extended Pan Macmillan team, and we have a few people from media who do book reviews and also in the greater publishing space. So that's just to give you a sense of the room, and our guests of honor today are the shortlisted candidates from our open submission period for 2020. We're so glad you could be with us, and this has all been inspired by you guys, and it is to honor the time and dedication you have given to your craft and to your work. And this is our way to sort of give you a bit more context into the publishing industry, and to also hopefully help guide you as you go forward in your publishing careers and your writing careers, and we hope that you find it useful. So if you can't hear us or for any reason have a technical issue that you have to log out and come back in, please use the same link. You will find us sort of in the same space and we'll be carrying on there. But if you can't stay for the duration of the workshop, please note that the session is being recorded and we will share it with all of you at a later stage, and we'll make it available also on our website. So if you have to leave or have a technical issue, whatever you missed, you can catch up on a bit later. So yes, I'm just going to check on our chats just to make sure that we can all hear each other and see each other. And hopefully it's so nice to recognize some names, and I'm glad that you were able to join us today. Great. So just to start, my name is Swongile Machika, and I am the associate editor at Pan Macmillan SA. And one of my duties here is to facilitate and work through the open submission period. So I'm very familiar with some of you, and you would have received a number of emails from me already. And I think I have one of the easier tasks for today, and that is just to give feedback to all of you regarding this year's submission process, but also where we find ourselves as Pan Macmillan, where submissions are concerned. So we are one of the few publishing houses that still has an open submission period, and that is to say that we actually invite unsolicited manuscripts over a course of 2 weeks, and then we dedicate resources and time to assess those and give writers feedback. This is something that we feel is very important, firstly because writing can be a lonely experience, and often people don't have the opportunity to get critical feedback from people in the industry or people that are not friends and family. And as we all know, feedback from friends and family differs from feedback that you might get from a professional. And for us, it is also an opportunity to see what people are writing about, find new voices, and also get out of our our publishing bubble, so to speak. So once a year, we open ourselves up to receive unsolicited manuscripts and are able to give authors feedback by way of readers' reports. How that works essentially is that we this year tried to streamline the process and made that an online process. So people were filling in a form online and then sending us their manuscript via email. And then that's automatically logged onto an Excel sheet. So we know who you are, we have your email address, we know what your manuscript is, and we know who's reviewing it when and who is the secondary reviewer. We are a team, our local publishing team is a team of 3 people. So we often have to get external readers to help us with the process. These are people who are well read, who are familiar with our publishing list. These are people we've worked with on other manuscripts. And so we trust their opinion, and we know that they know what we're looking for, but also are familiar with the industry and what's happening in the trade field. And then these people then give us their feedback, and then in various stages, we sort of cut the list of people that submit to us to a few people who we then consider for publishing or further development. This year, as I said, we tried to streamline the process and limit our call for submissions. So previously, we just did an open call. People could submit anything and everything. However, this year, we tried to align open submission period with our publishing objectives, and that meant that we were only looking for commercial fiction manuscripts. People still took chances, so we received over 300 manuscript submissions, and then only from that 300, only 250 people were actually eligible, and that is to say that they submitted a commercial fiction manuscript, or at least something that they believed that that's what it was. And then from that 250, each manuscript, believe it or not, is read by 2 people, at least in that first stage, who then suss it out if it is what we're looking for, if the person has writing potential, and various other criteria. And then from there, we make another cut. And then from the 250, only 24 people were longlisted, and we requested full manuscripts from them. And those people, again, are read by 2 different people who then give their feedback, and one of them gives us a reader's report, which we then send back to the author. And this year, obviously, we've invited all of them to join in the workshop as well. So at every submission that we receive is read at least twice, and those that are longlisted are read 4 times, and those that are then chosen to be shortlisted are further assessed by our internal editorial team to see if there's room for further development or how much intervention might be required, or if indeed it's a project that we believe that we can make a success of. And in this process, in the many years that we've been doing this, we've published only 1 title in the last 3 to 5 years that came out of the open submission period. So that is not a good, return on investment in terms of time and effort on our side, but also we think for our authors. And we wanted to do something a little bit more to improve the quality of writing and the quality of submissions that we receive, but also give authors feedback that is more comprehensive than what we're able to give in a reader's report. One of the things we found during our time in doing this is that some of the issues that we find in terms of assessing manuscripts is that writers write very much in a bubble, and in that bubble, they're not able to necessarily engage or see the other elements that one needs to consider in making a publishing or a book project a success. And that's one of the reasons that we're doing this, is that to give writers context of the publishing industry as a whole, but also the position that we as PAN find ourselves in, and what we think the best route to success in terms of finding new authors and new voices is for us. And also, if people are not able to be published with us, or for whatever reason choose to be published by someone else, they're able to navigate the publishing space and know what their rights are, what to look out for, and to think almost not just as a writer, but also as a consumer of books, as a person who sells books, and also as a person who needs to market and sort of give publicity for the books and the author. So throughout this morning, we hope that that's what you find that we're able to provide in the various discussions and talks that we're going to have, and the various topics. And if for whatever reason we don't touch on something that you were curious about or might want to know about, please do put it in our questions or chat box. And what we will do is that after this session, like I said, this video will be shared on our website. And with that, we will do a written blog that answers some of the other questions that we weren't able to reach. Like I said, for us, this is part of our goals to open up the publishing industry and also ensure that people are able to access publishing information, access agents, access editors, even if they're not necessarily published in the traditional sense. So in doing so, we hope that people are able to empower themselves to either self-publish or even sort of go the route of going with another publisher and knowing how best to get themselves published, even if they choose the traditional route. So that's just an overview of this year's open submission period. And now to get into detail about submissions, particularly to us, but also I think things that people tend to forget or overlook in now putting together a submission and sending it to a publishing house. Firstly, I think it is important to research your publishers. Google is a great resource, and most publishers are listed online and are very clear on their websites about what their publishing processes are, what they publish, and you're able to see what they've previously published and perhaps align yourself with that. I think if somebody doesn't publish poetry and you submit poetry to them, then obviously you're more likely to get rejected, and not because you're a bad writer or the poetry is bad, but simply because that is not what they do. At the end of the day, publishing is a business, and we need to sell books, and everybody is functioning in their own little corner, in the space that in which they think they are equipped and have the capacity to make a success of the projects that they work on. So I cannot stress it enough. After being a reader, the next thing is to research. Know who your publishers are, know what they publish, and know what their processes are in terms of the submission process. I think after that, it is that once you have written your draft or your proposal, have it read by someone else, have it proofread by someone else, simply because at the end of the day, we are publishers, and typos and grammar issues, although we don't hold them against people, can disrupt us and interfere with our ability to engage with your work. Also, for someone like us who has an open submission period, it means in that 2 weeks that we are open for unsolicited manuscript, like I said, we get a whole lot. This year we got 300, last year it was closer to 500. So it is very important to also be very clear when sending your emails. So state that is the open submission period for 2020. State that your name is Swongile Machika and your manuscript is how to get published, or whatever the title of your manuscript is. Those things just make it easier for us to navigate the administrative task of getting the submissions in and sending them to reviewers and keeping track of who's who and what's what and where did it go. Those are just some of the easy and small things that I think people could do to improve their submission. And then I think many of the other things is being aware of the space that not only yourself, but also the publishing houses find themselves in. We're a South African publishing house. We publish proudly South African titles, and therefore we tend to look for something that is relevant to our market and the people here. That said, you can't be relevant or relatable to everyone, but we do, in a general spectrum, publish for South Africans and publish South African stories. And then those things play a factor when we consider a manuscript. So without further ado, I think I've covered about everything regarding open submission period, and we can cover a lot more in detail in our blog, but we also have a number of resources on our website in the submissions tab that are frequently asked questions by retailers, bloggers, writers, that we've tried to address a number of things, and we will make even more available as we move on in this process and as we get more questions in doing more and more talks and open submissions. But for now, I think that is it from me. I'm going to hand over to our publisher, Andrea Natras, and she will talk you guys through our publishing position and also how the technicalities in terms of publishing processes work. Thank you.
Thanks, Sibongile. That was a great overview of our submission process. And I think also some really good advice for people in terms of Google being your friend to help you research who the local publishers are, or if you wanted to look even for someone like a literary agent, does a particular literary agent accept fiction as a start? What is their specialty? So doing your research is obviously very, very important and key. My name's Andrea. I'm the publisher at Macmillan. I have been now for the last 10 years, which is an exciting milestone to have reached. Just yesterday, we were celebrating the people that have had long service awards. And I work with Sibongile and Sandile. The three of us make up our local publishing team. We wouldn't be able to operate without the wonderful freelancers that we work with. Some of you are on this session, and just a shout out to you for the work that you do and the way in which you're able to add value to our various projects that we undertake.
Thank you very much. Chat later. Bye. Thanks.
Whoops, someone is not muted who should be. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, 10 years, it's remarkable. I wanted to give you just a very brief overview of the South African publishing landscape, just so that you have a sense of how South Africa fits in, or how South Africa is made up. You know, really, we've got three main sectors, and obviously this is an overview. So there are, you know, exceptions and there are other small sectors. But the educational sector makes up the majority of publishing in South Africa. So for schools and for education, for higher education. The academic publishing sector is also a very strong sector. And then there's the trade sector. And in the trade sector, you know, that when people talk about trade publishing, they're generally meaning the kinds of books that you'll get at a Bargain Books and Exclusive Books, a CNA, an independent bookstore. And that is the sector that Macmillan South Africa publishes in. Some of the other publishers who operate in the sector include Penguin Random House, and they have several imprints, Penguin itself, Umuzi, that specifically publish fiction. But then you've also got under the Penguin Random House, you've got the imprints of Zebra Press, you've got Strake and all its various imprints. And then you've got a company like NB Publishers with Tafelberg and Kwela. Again, Kwela is a fiction publisher. Melinda Ferguson Books, MF Books, which is associated now with NB. And then you also have Jonathan Ball. Jonathan Ball quite recently started publishing some fiction, or at least calling for fiction submissions, but largely their focus is on nonfiction. And under that Jonathan Ball umbrella, you also have Sunbird, which is a lot of gardening and cooking, and you also have something like their Delta Books, which is quite military orientated. And then you have a number of smaller publishers who are absolutely vital in the publishing landscape. I'm thinking of publishers such as Jacana, Bookstorm, Tracy MacDonald, Majaji, Caravan Press, and some of those, specifically Jacana, Majaji, and Caravan, do publish fiction. And then Sandile will chat to you later about the kind of traditional publishing versus self-publishing model, because obviously there are also a variety of options open to people who are wanting to self-publish. And, you know, I think it's important to get a sense that those publishers that I've outlined for you, the kind of top three, if you like, in terms of market share, Macmillan usually comes in around fourth. There is also a very large religious sector under the trade sector, and you know, your kind of top-selling nonfiction book is always something like your K53 Learner's Guide manual, if you have a look at those different charts. So it's important to get a sense that the industry as a whole within the Southern African landscape is quite small in terms of companies, is even smaller in terms of companies that are publishing fiction. And, you know, if I look at Macmillan specifically as a company, we're essentially made up of three different parts in terms of how we work. We work with our international sister companies, particularly Mac UK and Mac in the US, or St. Martin's Press. So we are selling a lot of their imported product. Someone like a highly successful bestseller, Lucinda Riley, with her sisters' books, is an international author that Macmillan sells locally. We also have an agency business where we work with companies such as Hachette or Walker Books or Pretty Books, and we import and sell their books. We also have a very thriving line of book products under the Henkler imprint. And that includes things from slime to puzzles, and it's so important to kind of allow for a diversification of what you publish. And then obviously closest to my heart is our local publishing team and our local publishing program that has been going since 2004, where we started off with some of the titles that Macmillan had was working with the Raven Archive, and we produced initially some titles from there. And I mean, I've been involved just editorially right from the beginning there. My first project with Macmillan was on Professor Tobias's Into the Past, his memoir. And over the years, we've grown our local publishing program to the point that now we are looking at between 20 and 25 titles a year. And those are authors who are generally, as Sibongile said, they're not necessarily South African, but they're generally based here in South Africa. Their books have got some relation to the South African landscape. And then interestingly, something which people don't realize is that our split between fiction and nonfiction is very much 3/4 of the titles that we publish are nonfiction and 1/4 of the titles that we publish are fiction. And the reason for that is very, very much market related. In years past, if you look at sales history, South Africans tend to purchase far more nonfiction titles than fiction titles. Areas which have been very strong in the past are politics, current affairs, memoir, and as a result, the fiction market has, until quite recently, I would say the last kind of 5 or so years, the local fiction market has been relatively small. And so that means that in a year when I'm publishing 20 titles overall, 15 of those are going to be nonfiction and 5 of them are going to be fiction. And within that 5 titles that are fiction, we need to make a further distinction into titles that we would consider literary titles and titles that we would consider commercial. And the interesting thing about literary fiction titles, and if I just talk very generally about sales numbers, you know, some generally, if you're able to sell between 1,000 and 2,000 copies in the local market, so this is very specifically South Africa, of a literary fiction title, you feel like that book has done well, and it's generally at least broken even, which is always a good thing if you're a publisher. And the reason that we publish those is really also around the kind of literary tradition of South Africa. We've got authors such as the late Ahmad Dango, we've got authors such as Mandla Langa, Sindiwe Magona. You know, these are the kind of giants of South African literature. We've published Nadine Gordimer in the past as well. And these are often the books that are shortlisted for the awards. We could have a whole session on the South African awards landscape, but let's not go there right now. So often they're a part of kind of building your brand in terms of, are you going to be shortlisted for an award, and how, you know, how does that have an impact on your overall brand and your visibility? And then on the commercial fiction side, let's say we're publishing 2 literary fiction novels in a year. So that leaves space for 3 commercial fiction novels. And obviously the number of titles that I'm talking about, these are constrained by the capacity that we have as a team. And when you compare us to the other publishers, I always like to say, and I think the results say for themselves, we're fighting well above our weight. And so the 3 of us in the team, we have to be passionate about a book in order to take it on. All 3 of us need to be passionate about it because all of us are involved at some stage or another in the working and the publishing and the producing of it. And wonderfully, in the South African local fiction space in the last couple of years, we've seen a real growth. We've seen a real adoption of an author such as Angela Makhowa, who will speak to you later, who is our most successful commercial fiction author at Macmillan. We've just recently released her 5th title with us, Critical But Stable, and her kind of publishing trajectory goes right back to red ink, which is, you know, absolutely wonderful. And we also have an author such as Gail Schimmel, who does very well for us in the local market, Sue Nyati, Mohali Mashigo. These are just some of the names. One of the wonderful things about these authors is that many of them are repeat authors. So if someone like Joanne Richards, who is another person who is a more literary author that we published, but if someone like that comes to us and says, I've got a new novel that I've been working on, we will always take a look at that new novel because we really want to build a relationship with an author over several books. Yes, a one-hit wonder is wonderful for everyone. Nobody's going to turn down a one-hit wonder, but more important and key, and I think this is something that you'll hear about and learn about today, is just this idea of building yourself a platform and creating a brand so that when your book, your third, your fourth, your fifth book goes into stores, you have instant kind of brand recognition. You have people who automatically go, it's an Angela McCullough, I have to have it. They don't even actually necessarily focus on what is that book about, but they have a sense of what are the kinds of books that Angela writes, what are the kinds of books that Sue Nyati writes, what are the issues that they look at. And so one of the things which having repeat authors does is means that you squeeze out that space even more in terms of new voices. And obviously new voices are absolutely key for us in terms of broadening our reach as publishers, reaching new readers, discovering new literary talent. And, you know, the thing for me, I have always felt that if you're a reader, doesn't matter what you're reading. If you're reading literary fiction, commercial fiction, the country as a whole needs more people who are seeing the value in books and are able to afford books. That is another whole issue and a discussion that we could have, but we need to grow our local community of readers. One way of doing that is also to grow our local community of writers. And as Sibongile explained, that's one of the reasons why we hold the open submission period. But every year we try to give a new voice, a platform, but you can imagine that while we have the open submission period, we do also have other authors or would-be authors who are being referred to us. And I think the last thing, or what I want to wrap up with saying, is really around encouraging people that, from the overview that I've given you, just to give you a sense that Pan Macmillan is relatively small and we're only able to publish 5-6 fiction titles a year. And the number of submissions that we are receiving is, you know, quite overwhelming when you consider how many titles we have to narrow down to. It's one of the reasons why all three of us, Sandile, Sibongile, and myself, have to feel passionately about a particular project. It is one of the reasons why we also use external readers to get their kind of sense of something. And it's also a reason why we will sometimes in a rejection say to people, we love this novel. We think it is very publishable. It just doesn't fit within what Pan Macmillan is looking for right now. And I think as an author, I mean, there are the famous stories of the, you know, J.K. Rowling's who rejected however many times before finally finding publishing success. But I think it's an important thing to take to heart that it is often that a manuscript that is publishable is not going to be able to find its place in the Pan Macmillan publishing program, but there are many other options and there are other publishers. And so I think it is really important. Sorry, I've got a timer that's making a lot of noise and I don't know how to shut it up. Dismiss, there we go. Sorry about that. I think it's important to just realize that there are things that you can do in terms of polishing your proposal, polishing your submission, and then, you know, you send it out into the world. And when it comes back to you, if it is rejected, and if a publisher is able to give you the time to give you some feedback and input on it, you know, my sense is that often you should be taking that to heart. You should also, as Sibongile said, be reading very, very widely to see what is out there. Are there voices that are similar to yours? Where would your particular novel fit in? And I think it is also absolutely vital just not to be discouraged. Some of South Africa's most successful fiction authors are self-published authors. Someone like Dudu, Busani Dube with the Hlomo series, with the standalone Zulu wedding. I mean, Dudu is an absolute inspiration to all of us. And Takalani M is another self-published author who's achieved a lot of success. But then there are also authors, Fiona Snickers, Janita Lawrence. They're people who are working the Amazon model really, and are making a real impact in those markets. So when one door closes for you, I promise there are another 5 to 10 that are open, that are worth exploring and worth having a look at. And I think that what is always inspiring for me is that whether you are an author who's going to be published or not, you've still put hours of your time and your passion into creating a manuscript. And I just have to say that that is something that we absolutely take our hats off to you for. We salute you. I think it's absolutely extraordinary how authors are able to create stories. We're very happy working with your words, not necessarily generating them. And I think it is very important for you to explore all of the models and all of the options that are open to you. And with that in mind, I'm going to now hand over to my colleague Sandile, who is going to discuss with you, what are the benefits of the traditional publishing model versus the self-publishing model, and also to talk a little bit about this digital publishing. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandile Nkosi. I am the editorial and digital coordinator at Macmillan. As Andrea and Sibongile have mentioned, I am also part of the local publishing team. So we work on production of our local titles. So I'm just going to start where Andrea left off in terms of having written your manuscript. So if you've now written your manuscript, you've put it out there, you've submitted to publishers, and you start getting reviews, and some of it is positive, some of it is not so positive. As she mentioned, it's very vital not to feel discouraged by the feedback that you get from publishers. Because the market, the South African market, the fiction market, as Andrea has mentioned, it's very small. There are other options that you can consider for your manuscript, like how to take it forward. And I'm just going to touch on those. Firstly, there's the self-publishing option. Macmillan is a traditional publisher. So in self-publishing, basically, it's the process of undertaking all the responsibilities related to the production of your book yourself. You can do this either yourself if you feel like you've got some skill to maybe lay out a book or design a cover, or there are self-publishing companies that can assist with this. And the difference here, I'm just going to go into the differences between traditional and self-publishing. So Macmillan is a traditional publisher. So basically what we do, firstly, we will assess what you submit to us, as we have done, which is why you are now here, because your manuscript has been reviewed up to this stage. And then if we put forward a publishing offer and we say we would like to publish your manuscript, then we kind of give the editorial backing for your manuscript. That means we assist you in developing your manuscript further. For fiction, whether it's the plot or whatever that needs to improve in the manuscript, we will do that together with you and with the help of an editor that we will assign to your project. We are also involved in the production of the book itself. So we will cover the costs for the cover design, the layout of the book, and the other things related as well to producing your title. The important thing to note about traditional publishing is that the publisher takes on the production costs. And that's essentially the difference, one of the main differences between publishing traditionally and self-publishing. And then we also will distribute your book to your mainstream bookshops, like an Exclusive Books or a CNA or Bargain Books. And also we will be responsible for PR and marketing of your book as well. So that is traditional publishing. just how traditional publishing works. And then the other kind of publishing is self-publishing. The difference with self-publishing is the cover design, the production of the book, the laying out, the editing, the proofreading. You as the author will take on those costs for yourself. And then you will also be responsible for acquiring an editor, acquiring a proofreader. There are many resources online that you can use to get these people. If you're looking for one, there's the Editors Guild. You can get an editor there. You can get a proofreader there. Cover designers, there are plenty of cover designers that you can find just through a Google search. Many of them have their portfolios online, so you can see what kind of covers they worked on, their style, the tone of the covers that they produce, and then you can choose one from there. And then also in self-publishing, then the tricky part is that you have to distribute your own book. So there is no network that you are exposed to as in traditional publishing for distributing your book. But there are also companies that can assist with distribution of your title. So they will work together with a mainstream distributor to distribute your book. But the thing is, you also cover those costs yourself. And then the other thing that you will be doing is you are also going to be responsible for marketing your book, for the publicity of the book, getting reviews for the book. The responsibility is on you to kind of work on your book and then focus on all those things. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the fact that self-publishing is not only limited to a print book. It's also, you can produce an ebook if you want. You can start with an ebook, which costs much less to produce than a print book. And it's also a good way to kind of test the market and see, because an ebook allows you to kind of have wider access to not only a local market, but to also an international market. So that's one option to consider. The other option to consider is print on demand. So there are also other platforms out there that offer print on demand services. There's Ingram Spark for self-published authors. There's Amazon CreateSpace. So how that works is that you will lay out your book, create a cover, have your files ready, and then you will upload them into these platforms. And then what they do is they have your files on hand, sort of, and then when someone orders your book, so they will also expose you to kind of a market. I mean, the most popular would be like an Amazon, that's internationally. We do have some few local ones that are emerging now that offer similar services. And then they give you kind of a storefront, and then when someone produces your book, then they print a copy or however many copies that are ordered, and then they ship to whoever has ordered the book. So it's a better way of kind of handling the self-published books, because back then what you had to do if you self-published your book is that you had to print a certain number of books, and then once you've published them, then you would be stuck with the stock or the whatever amount of books. Sometimes they would be in your garage or your car, and you'd be selling out of your boot. That's how it worked, because you would need to print more books in order for them to make sense in terms of the financial, because if you print less books, it costs more, but if you print more books, then the costs become less. So people would have to print more books in order to kind of take down the cost of printing, but then they would be stuck with these books. So with technology lately, and through print on demand technology, then you are able to just give a file to a third party. Then when someone orders, then there's a single copy or however many copies, then those copies will be shipped, and then you don't have to keep stock on hand. And then every month they will report to you, this is however many copies that were sold, and they pay you whatever is due to you as an author. The advantage also of self-publishing is that the royalties are high, because you've covered all the costs, and then the return is solely on, it's for you. While in traditional publishing, you will earn a percentage of the royalty. So that is usually discussed in the contract phase when you sign your publishing agreement. And then some of the other things that I wanted to touch on was that self-publishing, if it's the route that you want to take, we don't discourage it. It's a good way to, expose your book. Not every publisher is going to say yes to a book. Sometimes the book might be great, but perhaps the publisher is looking at the market, the investment, and they think this might not work. Sometimes it's just timing. So if you do decide to self-publish your book, what I would recommend is just know who you're targeting. So know who your target market is for your book. And then also produce a book that is the best quality. So, you don't want to publish a book that has spelling errors or, the quality is just not great. So if you do tend to self-publish, then we suggest that you put a book out there that is of the best quality that you can imagine. So it is important to get an editor, a proofreader, so that you make sure that the book that you're producing, your readers are gonna love it, they're gonna review it, they're gonna hype it up, and yeah, they're gonna be happy that they purchased your book. The other thing is to also, in terms of self-publishing, that you go out there and get more information. As Sibongile said, Google is your friend. Just get more information, just find out more about publishing, because there's other things such as, royalties or, other aspects that you will need to look into for publishing. So it is important to just get more information, especially if you're going to use a self-publishing company. Then it's important to understand what you're getting yourself into, what your return is going to be, and just know what you're getting yourself into, and just understand how the publishing industry will work. You won't understand everything, but just understanding kind of the basics of what's expected from the company, what's expected from you, and just, having that information to take the production of your book forward. The other thing is to build a platform for yourself if you are going to publish. This applies both to traditional and self-publishing, that it's important to have a platform, but the marketing team will talk to you more about this. When we say build a platform, it's just to be active on social media, have a website if you can. I mean, sometimes developing a website doesn't really need money. They are free, websites, free website platforms that you can use to create your own website. Have an Amazon author page, have a Goodreads author page, whatever platform that you can use that has readers to build your platform. Then it's best that you use it fully so that people know that your book is out there and that they're exposed to your book. And then get your book reviewed. If you do self-publish, then it's important that people know about your book, get it reviewed, whether it's on Goodreads or whatever platform it is, get it reviewed so that people know about it. They know it's a good book. They know, kind of the hype around it, so that, more people will want to get to read your book. And then promote it often as well. It's one thing to promote something once and then people forget about it, but make it a constant thing to promote your book. Keep promoting it, keep talking to people about it, keep, spreading the word of mouth basically about the book. And also it's important to publish in multiple formats because, with technology, not everyone prefers to read the print book anymore. So it is important to publish in multiple formats. So in publishing, we have, at PAN, so we publish books in 3 formats. We'll publish in print, we'll publish ebooks, and sometimes we publish in audio. Audio is fairly new, but it's something that's growing. So it's something that now we see there's growth and more people are listening to audio. So those are the formats that I would recommend you publish in, so that you reach more readers, and you have more people that can have access to the book, because not everyone can have access to a print book. But with a Kindle book or with an audio book, people can easily access it online. They don't need to go into a bookstore to get it, especially if it's a self-published book that might not be in mainstream stores. Then it's important that if it's available in another format, that people can easily get it through online stores or through Kindle or whatever the platform that they might want to use. So yeah, that's it from me for the self-publishing and digital publishing. So now we're gonna watch a video on the international commercial fiction by Trisha and Wayne from Pen UK.
Actually, before we watch that video, thanks, Sandile, that was great. I wanted to just hop in just to tell people that we are running slightly ahead of where we thought we were going to be, and we need overall to stick to our program. So please won't you put any questions that you have for Sandile, Sibongile, and myself into the chat, either the Q&A or the chat. And then what we'll do is we'll listen to our 2 UK editors who we were very excited that they agreed to do us some videos just on what they are publishing, what they are looking for, and how that fits into the Pan Macmillan international scene. And then we'll hear from Alison Lowry, who is a local editor. She's actually Angela's editor, get her input. But then we'll do a live kind of answering, Sandile, Sibongile, and myself, of the questions that have popped up to that point. So if there are no questions, we're going to do some a cappella amongst ourselves, and you want to save yourself from that. So please do ask some questions and we'll come back then. Thanks, Eileen. Over to you for the international authors.
Please just bear with me for a second. I'm just getting the sound sorted out.
Hello, I'm Trisha Jackson, Publishing Director for Fiction at Pan Macmillan UK. I'm delighted to be talking to you today about commercial fiction, particularly from the UK and international perspective. Sitting here in the gloom and cold of London, I'm extremely envious that you'll no doubt be enjoying summer sunshine. These are extraordinary times, and it's been a very sad and distressing year for millions of people across the world. And so it's comforting to know that books have helped so many get through this difficult period. We've seen that those very commercial page turners have done particularly well from authors who people know and trust. We publish a big range of brand authors, including Jeffrey Archer, Ken Follett, Lucinda Riley, Anne Cleves, and my own list includes David Baldacci, Danielle Steele, and Kristin Hanna. All authors who enjoy huge international success, and what they all have in common is the gift of storytelling, characters you want to root for, pace, and a strong voice. All the ingredients required for a good page turner. Outside the big name authors, we also have a number of debuts and authors who we believe have the potential to be future brands. One of those who I think it might be more interesting to use as an example is Fiona Cummins, an author we acquired a few years ago. What was it that we looked for beyond that number one, it's a brilliant story? In the case of crime, thriller, or suspense, it helps that the story has a twist you don't see coming, and a hook which can easily be summed up in a one-line pitch. This helps not just for the sales team who pitch for retailer space and PR for features, but also for communicating the message on publication. Take the big worldwide international bestseller Girl on a Train. It had a clear proposition. You sit on the train every day going to work and see the same scene, but what do you really see? And what if that person is living the life you once led? The title, package, and the shout line told the reader what it was about. You don't know her, but she knows you. There's a relatability issue too. Maybe we can all imagine being in Rachel's position. So going back to what we look for in a new author, what we want is the whole package. Gone are the days when a writer can sit in an ivory tower. In the UK, certainly, they need to want and be willing to get out there and take part in events, build a social media profile, network with other writers, be easy to work with, write a book a year in the same area, which is their USP. It's a tall order and it's a lot of work. There are so many promising authors out there who have written a terrific book, but the question is, do they have the skills and dedication to help promote it? And a question an editor can never know when they acquire that first book, is this a one-book wonder? And a writer can't know that either. Many people falter with second book syndrome and then come back strongly with a third novel. But I think we can all think of examples of a massive bestseller with book one who just couldn't follow up. So just using Fiona as an example, but her story applies to many who are seeing success. Her first book came in 5 years ago. It's a dark story about a bone collector, but it was the voice, the characters, prose and language that completely captivated me. I knew I had to have this book, and the sales and comms teams didn't need convincing that it was indeed a terrific read. Plus, it filled a gap on our list, as we didn't have anything quite like it, but it did fit into a clear subgenre for the sales team to pitch to retailers. Another major question I had to ask myself, is this a book that will appeal internationally? And that ticked the box, and she has sold well overseas. So it was easy to have a vision for this kind of book and know how to publish and package it. And once I'd met the author, I was even more certain that she was the real deal. We had a year to build for the publication of the first book, and it sold well, not huge, but it gave us a strong platform on which to build and grow. The next book showed a bit of growth, and then book 3 saw a doubling of sales. But all the time, and this is the important thing to mention, Fiona had been building a reputation in the crime writing community herself, engaging with other writers, being supportive and generous in giving quotes. And she's also proved herself to be a good panelist and a chairperson at events. In other words, her name's getting known. So all of these are points to ask yourself if you're considering a career as a writer. So consequently, we've come to the publication of book 4 with a very strong platform, a strong list of author reviews, a large list of 5-star reviews on NetGalley, and a growing awareness of the author and our commitment to her with retailers, consumers, and the media. It's a slow process, but it's bearing fruit. And we have an author that's getting better with every book, which is a joint effort, an editor who will help her, hopefully, and an agent, and she has the dedication. So it's hard to predict trends in terms of acquiring fiction because the life cycle of a book from acquisition to seeing it on the shelves is likely to be around 18 months. At the moment, I think there is a definite move away from psychological thrillers. There are so many out in the market that it's hard to get standout. But important to mention the recent international bestsellers which stand out. And they are Delia Owen's Where the Crawdads Sing, a wonderful story with a great sense of place and atmosphere about environmental issues, a woman who doesn't fit in a community, and a crime. And also The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris sold millions of copies worldwide, both word-of-mouth books. And a lot of that one's success was down to the fact it was based on a true story. And for now, in these times, people are enjoying those warm, comforting reads to lighten the mood. Plus, they're returning to the household names who they can trust to deliver a really good story. Every time I go to author events and hear authors discussing their careers, it's very, very rare that they hit the bestseller list with book 1. It's so often a case of endless rejection and persevering. For example, Lee Child, John Grisham, and David Baldacci all mention this. And then their stars align and they get the first success. They all say, if you love writing, keep at it. Write about what interests you, not just what you want to know about. Good luck. Thank you for listening and keep safe. Bye.
Hello, my name is Wayne Brooks. Hello, my name is Wayne Brooks and I'm acquiring editor over here at Macmillan in the UK. I primarily work on the pan list, the pan fiction list actually, where I acquire and I manage brands, fiction brands and commercial fiction in general. So it's probably easier to tell you about the authors that I look after. My biggest is the current #1 best-selling crime author, Peter James, of which we have here, Buying Them Dead. That's currently #1 in paperback. I also look after some what I would consider quite boys and male-oriented thrillers like Defend or Die, about an MI5 spy, debuts like Charlotte Levin's If I Can't Have You. I used to publish the wonderful Baron Chamberlain, Big Lies in a Small Town. And actually, I've got a top 10 saga writer at the moment in The Storm Child with Rita Bradshaw. So you can see I go across from women's fiction to erotica to horror. As long as it comes under the heading of commercial fiction and it sits on PAN, then I will publish it. What do I look for in a commercial fiction author? Well, is that author or is that novel, I would say. So in a novel, I'm looking for a really great plot, fantastic opening, and obviously some fantastic characterization that follows through from page 1 right until the very end. When it comes to authors these days, it's not really just about your novel, although that comes first. We have to love that book first. But then when we're publishing you, that's where you as an author come into your own. What's your social media platform like? Are you good in front of crowds? Could you do festivals, for instance? It's all about how you sell your book. After all, it is your book, you wrote it. So you become a big part of that whole publishing process now. And I don't think it used to be like that some years ago, but now, of course, with the advent of social media, it's easier in one way that we can tap into audiences. We can also look further afield, if you like, and we can use what data we get to sort of like tap into certain audiences and the segmentation of certain audiences, like age groups and gender and lots of things like that. If I look towards international trends in the commercial fiction space, for me, what seems to be still selling at the moment are the psychological thrillers. It seems to have been going on for a long, long time, and every now and then you'll get someone say, oh, that sort of thing is all over now, there's no point writing that. Actually, psychological thrillers have been around for quite a long time. You could probably class someone like Daphne Maurier as a psychological thriller writer, or you could also class someone like Patricia Highsmith as the grandmaster, if you like, of psychological thrillers. So I don't think they're over. It's just how you as an author put your voice into something. You know, it's more of the same, but it's different. Don't try and mimic anybody else. You've got to come up with your own idea, and that, you know, that idea may seem similar to someone else's, but it's how you interpret it and your voice, and that's what will sell to us, and that's how we will get you selling further out into the field and into the hands of the book buying public. I hope I've answered all your questions. It's been great talking to you. All have an absolutely fantastic day, and good luck.
We were really delighted to have that input from Wayne and from Tricia. Our colleagues in the UK, you know, the market is quite a different market in some respects, but their experience and the trends that they're seeing inevitably have an echo and have some resonance in our own local market. For our next segment, I'm delighted to have with us today Alison Lowry. Alison is many things when it comes to publishing, but the capacity in which we value her most is as one of our editors, our freelance editors. And in particular, and I think of relevance to our situation today, is the fact that Alison has worked with Angela McCullough on her last 3 titles. Most recently, as I mentioned, Critical But Stable, before that, Blessed Girl, and prior to that, Black Widow Society. And it's great to have you with us, Alison. Thanks so much. And just to be able to share your insights and experience, particularly around the local market and local fiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you very much for including me in this really interesting workshop today. I've been asked to talk about commercial fiction, and 3 points, which I'm going to try to do 5 minutes on. What is commercial fiction? The characteristics of good commercial fiction, and why do publishers and readers want to read it? what is commercial fiction is really what you have already heard from the two colleagues from Macmillan. In a sense, the clue is the word commercial because they sell better than literary fiction and smaller genres of fiction. But quite often, commercial fiction is sort of this, talked about as the poor relation of literary fiction, as if it's something that is not as good or as desirable or as readable as a Booker Prize winner. That's not true. And I think commercial fiction is a well-written book, mainly plot-driven and character-driven, good storyline, and makes you want to keep turning the pages. Commercial fiction also has a broader audience. It's something that is entertaining. You might learn something new. You might change your perspective about the world. You might just be pulled in because of the beauty of the language or the way the book is written or the plot is constructed, where there is a mystery to be unraveled, questions to be answered, a relationship that is going nowhere and then suddenly goes somewhere. It's the kind of fiction that draws you in from the first page, and it really does need to almost be from the first page. It's absolutely no good saying, look, just by the time you get to chapter 4, you'll be really into the novel. You're not going to get to chapter 4 if that first line and that first paragraph and the concept, the characters have not pulled you in already. So for me, commercial fiction also has a very practical categorizing reason, a labeling reason. It's easier for booksellers to know how to position the book in stores. It's easier for the sales team to be able to position your book when they're trying to interest a bookseller in buying your book. Publishers don't put books in bookshops. They have to sell that book to the bookseller and persuade the bookseller that this is worth stocking on their shelves. So in a sense, it's really just a convenient label, but I would not separate it too strongly or divide it too strongly from other categories of fiction. It's got to be really well written. You've got to use language in a way that is fresh and unusual and new. And you have a lot of competition out there. This is the broadest range of fiction in the market. In South Africa, your South African book is competing with Ken Follett. It is competing with Lucinda Riley. That's your competition. So you're fighting for those same spaces on the shelves as names that have already built their brands, that are going to have their new books out exactly at the right time, the Christmas market or the fall or whatever it might be. So you've got to be aware, and Andrea was quite clear, and I think it can be a little bit dispiriting to authors when you understand that on average, a publisher in South Africa is going to get submitted 200, 300 books a year, fiction, and they have space for 5, as Andrea was saying. And 5 of those 5, 3 might be repeat authors. So there might be the new Angela McCullough, they're going to save a space for her, definitely. One might be somebody they're taking a chance on, a debut writer. And then there's 3 other slots and 200 odd books. So I think you have to be aware that you're competing apart from anything else. You're competing for a slot. It's not personal when you get turned down. It's the point I'm trying to get to is that you need to lift your book as high as you can possibly get it. Have it sparkling by the time you press send. A lot of authors, they're just so relieved to have finished their book. Their mother has read it 3 times. All their friends think it's fabulous, and they just press send. And that's a pity, because it might not be ready. And you might miss that 3rd slot simply because you got tired and it's a little bit sloppy and you didn't read and reread and re-edit and revisit that chapter one, that first chapter that is going to pull that publisher into the book and make them think, this is a voice worth reading. The second question is, why do publishers and readers want to read commercial fiction, which is kind of an odd question, and it gave me some pause. I think the same reason that everybody else does. We're readers. We like to read books that entertain us and challenge us and maybe transform us in some way. We like to read somebody's new way of looking at something, or somebody's story about a community, a life, a person that is so other to yours that you learn something really interesting. You might love a mystery. You might be the kind of person who is intrigued by, why did they do that? Or what is she up to? And that's the magic of and the craft of the fiction writer, who can pique your interest, give you a first line that makes you sit up and go, I did not see that coming, or a twist in the plot where you thought you were way ahead of that author. You knew exactly who'd done it. You knew exactly where this is going, and they are going to end up together. And then a curveball comes in from the side, from a clever writer, that makes you go, I did not see that coming. And I want to read more. Essentially, publishers want to sell books. They want to invest in you. So I'm talking about the traditional publishing here. There are many other ways, as you have heard already, and we'll hear more of getting your work out there, as people like to say, or finding a community of readers, of people who like what you say and how you say it, how you use language, how you make them think. Publishers, however, have businesses to run, and they want to invest in a writer. So they want to know that, firstly, they're happy with a one-hit wonder, but then they've got to replace that one-hit wonder every single time. If they are looking at a writer where there is a spark, just a little diamond in the dust there, somebody who is saying something in a different way, who has constructed a book in a slightly different way, who has a fresh take on the way they use dialogue, language, descriptive powers, whatever it might be. They're looking to develop that writer so that they know that they can build a relationship, they can help that writer grow and get better and better with each book. So then you become that repeat writer who is going to deliver every couple of years something that is not necessarily more of the same. But if you take a writer like Lucinda Riley, who has completely built this fan base, this following of readers who just love everything she writes, and particularly when she writes in a sense like Marian Keyes as well, like a family or one character is a spin-off from a series of books. You get so invested in those characters. Publishers are people too, and they get just as invested. They don't want their books to fail. They don't want their books to sit on shelves and get sent back. They are passionate about what they do. And once they have said, yes, we want you, they're not going to leave you hanging on your own. They're going to support you. They're going to help you grow. They're going to match you with an editor who gets you and who understands that that's where you're a bit weak in that area. And why don't we just think about just switching the tense? Let's do this, let's do that. Experiment, try something different. Or there's a hole in your plot here. And I know Angela is talking to you a little bit later, and Angie and I have had lots of conversations where I said, but Ange, that's not convincing me there, because if she did that then that couldn't have happened then. And it's that collaboration and that conversation that your publisher is going to expose you to as a writer, and hopefully will help you grow and develop and just get better and better at what you do. My third question that I was asked to address is, what are the characteristics of good commercial fiction? How do you tell a good book from a bad book? It's quite difficult, to be honest, in today's accessibility to publishing. In more formal, traditional commercial publishing times, your publishers were your only route to market and your only route to an audience. So in a sense, you had to study the publishers, as Andrea talked about earlier, and as did Sibongile as well, to see who publishes the kind of books that you want to write. So you would have imprints within a big publishing organization, one of the big ones like Penguin Random House, and you would know that that imprint, where you see that on the logo of the spine, is more the broader appeal commercial fiction imprint. The other one is more literary and is going to be looking for the smaller sales, but the bigger prestige perhaps on a list. It is going to attract more of that kind of person. You know that if so-and-so publishes commercial fiction, let's say Pan Macmillan is right in that lane, that's how you pitch your book to them. I write a little bit like so-and-so meets so-and-so. Don't waste their time with this is a book about such and such, and she lives a happy life and meets her best friend. Don't position yourself with somebody who writes a little bit like you, or how you might aspire to write. So I'm in the Angela McColber vein. I write books that are strongly character driven, strongly plot driven, and with a bit of mystery in between, and quite a lot of dark humor if you're Angela McColber. So you can sell yourself in that way. Everything comes down in the end to the writing. You can have the best story in the world, the most wonderful character who is going to go on extraordinary adventures and have disasters and pick herself up and start again. And if the book is not, if the words don't sparkle on the page, nobody's going to keep reading. Sadly, it has to be really, really well written. So pay attention to language, pay attention to how you describe something, pay attention to developing a believable character that is not one-dimensional. Interview your characters, sit with them, ask them what they had for breakfast. You're not going to write about what they had for breakfast, but unless you get to know your character intimately, you are not going to represent that character well on the page. Readers get very invested in characters. You want them to miss that character at the end of the book. You want them to not want to let go of so-and-so because you've traveled a journey with them. You've been enchanted by their travels, their inspiration, the way they fall down and get up again. I think I would not be alone in saying that when you think about your favorite books, you're going to think about the character at the same time. So a lot of really good commercial fiction, I would say, has a twin balance: plot-driven, strong storyline. We all love stories, and we all have stories to tell. How it's written, and strong characters that are believable, that we care about, that resonate with us, and words that connect in two different but intertwined ways, like with your heart and with your head. That's good commercial fiction. I think that's me wrapping up. I think we might have a time for questions later on, but I'll leave that to Andrea to talk about.
Thanks so much, Alison. Always really useful to hear from someone who's actively engaged in creating our most successful author brand in terms of locally Angela McCullough, so that's great. Thanks for sending through some of your questions. We also had one or two other questions emailed to us. Bonnie, you asked, what are the approximate percentages on any one book, print versus digital? I'm not quite sure if you mean what kind of percentage of sales do you see? I'm going to just briefly speak to that, but if it is something else that you're meaning, please can you, okay, perfect, great. I see you say yes. So it's interesting because obviously the South African landscape, despite our kind of cell phone, smartphone penetration, we find that our digital sales are still very small when compared to our physical print books. We do see a trend whereby if a book sells incredibly well in print, it does sell better or well in digital. But interestingly, you know, you're looking at maybe 10% of sales on a book that is one of your more successful titles. But if you have a book where you're only selling 2,000 or 3,000 and you are selling then not even, you know, that's not the most kind of successful book in terms of your digital, your ebook sales. You are happy if we are reaching kind of 3 figures. So it's fascinating. I mean, even under lockdown, when bookstores weren't able to operate, we did see an increase in our ebook sales, but you're starting off a relatively small base. And this is something that I've discussed with other publishers as well. It's certainly, it doesn't mirror the international trend. In the international trend, you see some very high percentages of sales digitally on certain types of book, the so-called bodice rippers. The ebook percentage there is always higher, quite considerably higher than the print book. So we do, you know, our ebook sales are, they do lag behind international trends. And even locally, you know, the numbers are still relatively small. You also asked, Bonnie, about titles and are there any trends in titles? You know, that is very hard to say. For us, it's really important for a title to be well suited to the book, the manuscript that we're working on. Sometimes an author comes to us and they've already got that title settled. Very often it's a collaborative process. And I mean, there were various kind of international trends with the girl on a train, girl on a here, girl doing this, girl doing that. But, you know, I don't think that's necessarily something which is applicable locally. For us, it very much has to be about something that is suitable to a particular manuscript. Sibongile, you were going to answer a question about the commercial fiction trends in South Africa.
Yes, I think where commercial fiction is concerned, the biggest thing that I can point to that's a very clear trend is that a lot of our commercial fiction is relationship driven. So relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, are sort of the propelling factor or big factor in terms of the plot. And that's true of any one of these titles of ours. And I think though, beyond that is that even with this pal or any other pal, that then each author has their own unique voice. So, and I think another secondary trend, if I can put it that way, is that commercial fiction also touches on a lot of societal issues, not so much in the sense that they are sort of like very in your face kind of topic that is addressed, but in the things that the characters are going through and in the things that the characters are faced with, a lot of societal issues come up. So whether it's poverty, whether it's LGBT issues, whether it's abuse, whether it's xenophobia, that through the characters' lives and what they go through, we're able to see and sort of also relate to the things that they face in their particular world. Again, relatability, I think you'll find that depending on who the targeted audience will be, you'll see that then the issues and the characters are relatable and are believable in that world of people. As Andrea often says, is that I think with any book, but particularly with commercial fiction, is that what it does, it's either puts up a mirror to people to say, look at yourselves and examine yourselves, or it's a window into a completely new world for people. And I think, yeah, beyond that, I think in trying to find new voices, part of it is that you don't want more of the same, but a lot of it can have similar pillars, which are societal issues, which are relationships, and from lack of another phrase, sort of human interest things, you know, that irrespective of who you are, where you're from, you can relate to them.
Thanks, Sibongile, that's great. Sonia, you asked 2 questions. I think the first one I'm going to leave for the moment, or we're going to leave, because I'm hopeful that when you hear from our marketing and publicity colleagues, that will also speak to that question. But Sandile, if you could please have a look at that question about the distribution of South African books to other countries.
Hello. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring up the question. Yes, so Sonia, how distribution of South African books to other countries work is that, firstly, yes, there is selling rights, whether it's for language or territorial rights or whatever kind of rights it could be. But another option, as I mentioned before, could be print on demand. Services such as Ingram's. If you're self-published, then it's Ingram Spark, but for us publishers, we use something called Lightning Source. So as I mentioned, you will upload your files onto the platform and then put them there, and then you pay a certain fee to Ingram's, and then they will firstly check your files if everything is working fine, but then also you pay an access fee to the market. So that means your book will be available through retailers, like bigger retailers in other countries, such as your Barnes and Noble or your Blackwells in the UK, or other kind of bookstores that are. So if in a certain territory there's a bookstore, you know, like a popular bookstore, like an Exclusive Books in South Africa, then they will make sure that they supply that bookstore with your book. So that's one option. If you haven't sold any rights to any other publisher outside of the country, then there's that option to make your book available through print on demand. Also, sorry, I'm just reading your question again. Yes, the books will be competing against a larger market, but also what we've noticed with the books that we do make available through print on demand is that fiction tends to kind of cross borders. Like, it doesn't matter where, you know, the book is set, or how, you know, who the author is, or things like that. We've kind of seen that fiction does tend to do well on internationally through the platform. So for me, it is a worthy exercise for an author to undertake. So, and it doesn't cost that much to put the book on the platform. I mean, it ranges from about 500 to 1,000 Rand, and then you will pay kind of every year you renew the access fee to the market. But setting up your book on the platform, you only do it once, you pay once, but then annually you will renew the book, the access fee to the market. And that's also just a minimal fee of about 200 Rand. So it really is worthy. And it allows you also just to see how your book will be received by the international market. And then other options, as I had mentioned, an ebook usually is available worldwide through Amazon. You can make it available through a platform such as Amazon or Kobo, or other ebook selling platforms. There's ebooks.com as well. It is also a great way to get access to the market, the international market. And as Andrea mentioned, sales internationally tend to be bigger than locally. I mean, even with our ebooks, you know, our sales are not restricted to South Africa. So we do see sales coming from various countries. So it is worthy to kind of try the market out there and then see how it'll do.
Thanks, Sandile. That's a great overview. And then just the last question that I think we've got time for before our comfort break. Somebody was asking about if you have submitted to a publisher and they reject your submission and they offer you some suggestions in terms of rework and revise, if you then resubmit it to that same publisher, is it viewed with the same kind of enthusiasm, or is there a sense of that person, you know, is it looked at afresh? And the answer is very much yes, we do. But, you know, I would also encourage you not to just submit to one particular publisher, because for the various reasons that you've heard so far, is that a book that is not necessarily suited to Pan Macmillan might well find a home somewhere else. So I wouldn't be, you know, I think that it's important to approach a number of publishers. I'm often asked this question as well, you know, can I submit my manuscript to more than one publisher at a time? Absolutely, you can. The only thing that we ask as publishers, or which it is nice to know, is just simply that the manuscript is out for submission to several publishers. And if you are, you know, if you are rejected, if you're given some feedback, and you come back to us with the revised manuscript, we will certainly look at it again. And also we will often try, and we've got a pool of readers who we make use of, and we will often ask one of them, somebody who hasn't read your book before, to engage with it so that it's given a fair opportunity. We are now at 10:30, and we have a comfort break in our program for 10 minutes. So Sibongile, if there's anything that you want to add to that, but otherwise we will reconvene at 20 to 11 sharp.
Yes, please.
Great, thanks everyone.
back, everyone. We're just going to wait for 1 more minute for everyone to come back. So now we're going to continue with our program. So the next thing we're going to go into is another important aspect of publishing, which is selling your brand. So now we're moving into the stage where you've published your book and now you have to market it out there for people. I mean, once a book is published, you want to make as many people aware of your book as possible and have it out there. So the next person who will be chatting to you is we'll have 2 of our colleagues from the sales and marketing team to chat to you a bit about selling your books and marketing. Up next, we have Gillian Spain, who is our sales and marketing director. And she will talk to you about the business of selling books. Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Andile. Hi, everybody. The business of selling books. So I guess some people might consider this the boring part. And I thought to sort of stick with that theme, I'd show everybody a couple of graphs just to get us thinking about how your book is part of a bigger business and how that works in the ecosystem of publishing. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, the first slide, I just wanted to kind of show everybody, and these numbers are as of the end of October 2020, and
Sorry,
it's
Jill,
a snapshot.
Perhaps I'm on my own, but I can't see your screen.
Yes, Jill, we can't see your screen.
Okay, hang on. Now?
There we
Yes,
go, that's great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So these are snapshots of how the South African market looks in terms of sales. These numbers are taken from Nielsen's, which is the tracking service that we all feed into, and all book sales, or most book sales that go through the tills are represented here through the Nielsen numbers. This is the South African market as of 2020 and how it kind of breaks down in terms of adult fiction, which accounts for just under 20% of the total sales in the market. You can see the non-fiction percentage there is sitting at almost 48%. A huge part of our market is non-fiction focused, and we see really strong sales to our non-fiction to books. And then on the side there is the way the children's market feeds into that, and children's fiction accounting for just under 10% and children's nonfiction sitting at 17% of the overall market. So I think it's nice to see where fiction sits within this graph and how big a piece of the South African sales fiction titles account for. if I go on to the next slide, within that fiction genre, you can break it down into what we've been talking about. We've been spending a lot of time chatting about commercial fiction this morning, and the way Nielsen's classify commercial fiction is really under general fiction, which accounts for 34% of all the fiction sales in the market, and under general fiction, literary fiction is a subsection of that. And then crime, thriller, and adventure, you can see neck and neck with general fiction in terms of sales. I think somebody had a question around, I think I read somebody had a question around what the market responds to, where those sales come from fiction. And here you can see crime, thriller, adventure, general fiction, and then romance and sagas sitting at 13%, sci-fi and fantasy, 7% of the overall market, and then going down into historical fiction, graphic novels, sadly at only 1% of the total fiction sales, and short stories and anthologies. And you can see how this informs a publisher's decision on what to publish. So when we're looking at where the market is, what the market's responding to, and you've written a sci-fi sort of fantasy fiction novel, it might not necessarily fit with what the market is looking for. And that's why you might struggle to get published in that genre. And then just an overview, a quick overview of our market share by retailer. These are Pan Macmillan's numbers, and it will depend on the publisher and their own mix of titles. But this is just looking at our fiction sales in 2020. And you can see bargain books and exclusive books really taking us to 60% of the total fiction sales in the market for the year. And I just need to point out that this excludes any ebook sales. So we're talking specifically here about physical sales, our physical sales out. And then Reader's Warehouse, Take a Lot, and CNA making up sort of the top 5 and a huge chunk of our overall market. And then our independent customers, we put up all our independent customers under one sort of banner for the purpose of this. They make up 4% of our total fiction sales. And then smaller than that, P&A, Wordsworth, school and library suppliers, sort of rounding off our total market. I just wanted to say, in terms of reach, Bargain Books has 88 stores across the country. Exclusive Books have 40 stores. CNA have 160 stores. Someone like Reader's Warehouse have 5 stores, but have a strong online sales presence. And Take a Lot, I think a lot of people will be interested to see what that Take a Lot percentage is. I think obviously it's growing for us. And they've had a particularly good year because of what's happened in the market, but still not necessarily the level of online sales growing, but not necessarily where people perceive it to be. Most of our sales still coming through those traditional outlets. And then just a look at our top 10 fiction authors overall for 2020. The total South African market, this is across publishers, it's not just Pan Macmillan. And you'll see there, listen, you'll recognize all the names. In fact, every single name here is a brand. One South African author in the mix there at number 4, and that's Dion Meyer. And I just want to point out that I think this gives you a breakdown of how many units sold in terms of volume, the average selling price in this column, and then the title count. So you can see all of these are brand name authors with strong backlists. So they're not just selling one book in a year, they're selling multiple titles in a year which is why they're featuring in that top 10 slot. And just a stat around the top 100 best-selling fiction books for the year, 82% of those are brand authors. So you can see the competition is fierce. And if you don't stand out, you stand a very good chance of kind of getting lost in that brand author mix in terms of fiction. Okay, and then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the process of selling in your book. Once it's been published, or not even once it's been published, once we have an idea that your contract has been signed, the local publishing team have your manuscript, we have a pub date, then the sales team, at that point, before the book is published, the sales team are briefed, we're given chapters to read, and then between 3 or 4 months in advance of the book's publication, we go out into the market and pre-sell your book. We have a sales team that's based around the country, and we service our customers across the country. We have monthly appointments with book buyers, and you generally sell in anywhere between 30 and 50 books a month to a customer. That includes our children's lists. And that means that you have a couple of minutes per book to sell that book to that customer to convince them to take a chance perhaps on a debut author or somebody that's maybe on their second book but hasn't quite broken to the market yet. So it's very important that we have everything in our arsenal to convince those booksellers and buyers to stock your book and promote your book. And that's sort of how we get your books into store. So you're in competition with many titles, because it's not just, we might be selling our 50 titles, but somebody from Penguin Random House might be selling their 100 titles. So you can see a competition is fierce for shelf space, and we need to make a really good impression with your book. We need to make sure it stands out, that we get the cover right, that we have a hook, that we know there's going to be publicity, that we can kind of give booksellers a feel for where we're pitching the book and what we anticipate for the book. And then once we've done the pre-sale, we combine all those numbers from around the country, and we decide on a print number, how many we're going to print for the market. We use that to determine the print number. And once your book hits the shelf, customers are then, in terms of our contract with them, customers are expected to then have your book on the shelf for a minimum of 4 months. After 4 months, if the book isn't selling at a rate that they would like to see in terms of turnover, they then have the option to return your book. So we have a really short window to make an impact in terms of making sure that the book does well in that first. We have to hit sales in that first month to ensure the longevity of the book. And stores have up till a year to return your book. So they might keep it on their shelf for 10 months, but then decide, actually, we're going to make space for the new the new authors that are coming out, and then they return your book. And we get a lot of queries from authors about why isn't my book on the shelf? I published it 2 years ago, and we have to explain it's the same as, it works in the same as any other retail outlet where you have sort of a fashion, where you have continuous movements of stock. So you have to make room for new to entice customers into that space, and that's why they don't hold books indefinitely, because they literally don't have the space to hold everything. Yeah, I think that's basically an overview of the business of selling books, and I'm going to hand over to Sibongile to introduce Taz, or can I just introduce Taz? Okay, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Tasman, who is our marketing and sales coordinator, to tell you more about branding and why that's important.
Thanks, Joel. Good morning, everyone. As introduced, my name is Tasman. I work with Gillian in the Sales and Marketing Division at Macmillan South Africa. I assist the sales team in terms of creating all the presentations that is necessary for them to present to retailers and booksellers so they can make the decisions to get stock into stores. I also assist in the development and the kind of distribution of all the marketing assets that go into promoting a title in store with our brick and mortar physical bookstores, as well as online, which will take on a more digital element to promoting the books. So when I talk about the marketing elements in store, I'm talking about when you walk into a store, there'll be sensomatic sleeves. Those are the sort of things that you see as you right as you walk into a bookstore. There'll be posters, bookmarks, various ways of kind of gauging customer attention as soon as you walk into a store, because you are competing with thousands and thousands of other titles. So it's really great to kind of get your readers' attention as soon as they walk into the door. Moving on to the topics I'm going to be discussing today. The first one is going to be big brands and what make them work. And then secondly, we'll move on to how authors can help themselves. So I think it's always a great idea to kind of outline and get a good definition in terms of what we mean when we discuss what a brand author is. So it's easier to get a better sense of what that looks like, especially in the South African market. So the first thing is you need to understand what a brand is, which is often sometimes a bit of a tricky definition because it can mean certain things to different people in the sense that people associate different things with a product. In this specific case, we're talking about books. So someone may view a Danielle Steele reader or a book for Danielle Steele as a certain type of readership, whereas someone else can say, no, it can actually also be a younger readership. So it's that sort of understanding that brands are fluid, but they are something that is instinctual in the mind of the reader. You know right out the gate when your brand author is releasing a book, because oftentimes you'll be very aware of the marketing, and also you'll be very aware of what the kind of book and story that author produces. So the next thing I want to just discuss is that becoming a brand author is sometimes a long journey, especially if you look at the South African publishing landscape, particularly because what we find is, being an author is not your day job. It is often a side hustle for a lot of South African authors. So, in terms of, making it your prime job, it can be a little bit difficult in terms of getting consistent books out into the market, which is one of the key things you have to look at if you want to make your way into being a brand author. You have to make sure you kind of get your books out as consistently as possible into the market to meet that that window frame of 4 to 6 months and having it on the shelf. So consistent writing, ideally it would be best if you could release the title every year, but we know that this is sometimes not possible. So if you can make it every second year, or every kind of interval, just so that you don't lose your space in the mind of the reader, that they'll still be aware of you when they walk into stores. And while as for booksellers, it's also important to understand that as much as you're catering to your readers, you also have to pay attention to booksellers and get their attention, because they are the ones that, if a reader is not necessarily sure what they're looking for, they are the ones that will hand sell a book to you and kind of describe you and maybe pass you on as a possible read that they may want to get into. The next thing is, again, with tying in with consistent writing, is going into building a substantial backlist. And as Joel explained in the previous slides, is you can see all the authors and their sales and the amount of titles that they have sold. It speaks to them releasing multiple books. So as much as they'll release one new book a year, for example, they have a backlist of maybe 20 books that and people are starting to get into a series or just getting into their writing that is still selling in the market. So it's important to work up your backlist as much as you can. you know, if you don't have that yearly interval, you know, producing a book every year, that's fine. But as long as you try and get in that space where you can build a good backlist, in that you are now becoming cemented in the market. People now recognize your name and what your book looks like on shelves. And booksellers as well also take a good look at, you know, this author that is producing consistently and has books on the shelf often. Then you have to also discuss there's a thing where you have to kind of look at creating your brand, and it's looking at the look and feel. So when you talk about cover treatments and getting a sense of what it is that you want your books to communicate to customers, oftentimes when you're just starting off as an author, you are also testing the market as well, because you may write a particular book with a certain audience in mind, but when it's in the market, you may find that there's a different kind of audience you are attracting, and this will then inform your next publication and your next publication. And then slowly you'll begin to build the brand identity, and you will be, you know, you'll understand your reader very well, and they'll understand you in terms of what you offer every publication or so. So it's okay if, I think in the beginning, you're still trying to figure out what it is that it looks like and what you want your readers to take away from your work. It's a gradual process that happens over time. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly just to illustrate what it is I mean on this over time progression. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So because I work with both international and local brands, it's just a good idea to see them side by side, just to see what they look like. One of the things you'll notice is that the author names are what start getting bigger and bigger as an author becomes a brand, because then readers are immediately recognizing who it is that they are, you know, buying into and their story. As you can see, Gail Schimmel, she's becoming one of our brand authors as well. So her title name is becoming bigger and bigger as we go. Then we're just going to look at Angela McCall as a case study in terms of brand development. So as you can see, these are all her trade paperback publications through the years. So you can see this was gradual progression with her first publication in 2007, the trade paperback of Red Ink. And then gradually becoming, you know, more cemented in the cover look and cover treatment of her books, and then the particular emphasis on her name, because now you're aware that she is a brand author. Just to note that in between this, there are paperback publications of each title. So these are not just what she's produced in those years. There have been publications of like paperback publications of the trade that have come out in between these years. So it just, again, it gives you a sense of, you know, how, you know, that development happens over time, and it really is about putting in consistent work. Also, I'd really say it's important as an author in this day and age, understanding that once your book is published and, you know, it's on the shelves and you've signed your contract, it is important to note that that's not the end of the job. You have to engage with the marketing team, and then later the publicity team as well. You have to give us your time in interacting and get a social media platform. You need not necessarily be a natural born marketer, but you do need to be able to interact with booksellers, pop into stores, sign a couple of books, let them know that, you know, who you are, and, you know, get that sense of rapport, and also interact with your readers on social media. They love reaching out. If you have a Twitter platform, they love talking to you about your book. So it's that sort of thing you have to start getting comfortable with as you get into, you know, the publication phase and it being on the shelves of stores. And yeah, so that basically also talks about how authors can help themselves, just basically networking. Use your network as well. If you know there are people who might be interested in the work you're doing, don't be afraid to kind of ask for, you know, maybe you could sell corporate sales or, you know, anything like that, because people are more willing to help you than you think they are. And also just get to know your writer community. It definitely helps learning and working with other authors and just being and interacting with them. For example, Alison Lowry mentioned that when you sell a book, you like to be able to compare yourself and say this book is much like a, for example, Dudu Busani Dube. And if you're able to do shout quotes and things like that, people will be able to link you to different publications in that same kind of commercial fiction genre or whatever genre it is that you choose to work within. I'm just going to quickly attempt to answer the question from Sonia in regards to the marketing styles and regarding social media. I think your question was the UK seemed to be, or the UK publishers seem to be a little bit more interactive on their platforms in terms of marketing their books. And you asked, you know, relation to blogger tours and things like that, and how does that work in the essay context? So from my experience so far, I'd say the difference is that in the UK market, the readership there is very much aware of who the publishers are and the author stables that are part of the different publishing houses there. I think here in South Africa, we are now starting to have more awareness of publishing houses, but still the emphasis is on the author. You will know the author more so than the publishing house itself. So the way the publishing houses market might be a little bit different. We might get more interaction in the UK than here, but I think we are definitely starting to grow that sort of publication house and reader kind of communication, where people are now following us on our social media and understanding what it is that we publish, because sometimes I think it's more you know, would-be writers that take more cognizance of who the publication houses are in South Africa rather than just the readers, because readers, you know, will kind of buy a book, but not necessarily know who the publication house is that it belongs to. On the question of blogger tours, that is something that we have tested out, and it is something that probably is not a lot of people are used to. I think readers, when they read and they engage with the book, it's more you'd like to talk to someone about it. And blogger tours is something that I think is something we can still develop in the marketing aspect of books, and getting different bloggers to kind of chat about a book and get a sustained kind of week of conversation going. It's never a bad idea to adapt different methods from the UK or the US and try and test it out, and sometimes keep it going in a way that makes people more aware of what it is. And yeah, they can follow it easily next time. So I think that's everything for my segment, Sibongile.
Thank you so much, Taz. Just to say as well that a lot of this, especially speaking for PAN specifically, is that we're very collaborative in our approach. So in as much as we like and do participate in building a brand, it's not, you're not left to your own devices, you're not left sort of alone to figure it out. In many of the ways we help guide an author, and I think we also understand that it takes a while to build a brand. So we do that very collaboratively and in the most authentic way possible. So you don't have to be on all social media platforms. You don't have to do everything that, you know, everyone does. We'll sort of try bit by bit to work you into the various spaces that seem more natural for you as an individual author. But yes, so after the publishing aspect has been addressed, and then we are in the sales and marketing phase, and your book is sort of being sold into stores by our reps, and we're getting orders in. What we also do then is hand you over to our publicity team, who I'm introducing now. So Eileen and Veronica and Dee are our publicity team, and they're the ones who help our authors and assist our authors in terms of getting them out there, getting the world to know about them as authors, but also about the works that they produce. And just to hand over to Eileen and Dee and Veronica, who will tell you more about how our publicity works and how authors engage with media and other influencers and bloggers in the book industry. Veronica, over to you.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Just to quickly introduce myself, Veronica Napier, and then Eileen works out of Johannesburg, and Dee, who's unfortunately writing an exam today, handles all our social media. So I think the purpose of publicity is obviously a support role, a support in terms of sales, quite important, because obviously if we didn't sell books, none of us would be here, and supporting our authors. So as an overview, what we try and do is look at the media as a whole and match. It's quite important really to match the right book to the right media. So it's no good sending a literary fiction title to someone who really much prefers reviewing romance. So it's part of that matching. And very importantly with publicity, we found is to maintain relationships, sustain relationships. It's probably the most important thing. And as the whole media landscape is diminishing, well, in terms of books, unfortunately, other doors are opening up, but they are diminishing. So it's important to maintain those that we have and to look creatively towards new doors opening and actually being proactive about making that happen. And that is easier on the social media platform than in the traditional radio, print, and TV. But that's in done. Radio, print, and TV are important. And particularly for a debut author, the more attention you get, the more good reviews you get, the more the noise out there about your book. Obviously that gets word of mouth going, people go into stores, they ask for it if it's not already there, all of that is important. So the actual process is once the publishing is done, we have a release date, we then have a meeting with the author. And I think I'm going to let Eileen expand on that part of it more fully, but just to echo what our UK colleagues said and other people have said, is that it's really important for the author to be willing to work quite hard. We may ask you to do horrible interview times, 6:30 TV studio. We may ask you to, in the days of physical launches, hopefully they'll return, long queues, which can be tiring for signing books. You might have to actually do more than you bargained for, but it's important that you're out there. We support you as much as we can. We go with you to events, but the work is yours to do a lot of the time. So we have an initial meeting with authors where we decide on basic things like when we're going to do a cover reveal. We also do trailers for a lot of our books, not all of them, but we find that those are visually appealing. They get a good response on social media. We discuss launches. This year it's been a lot of virtual launches, but the two don't exclude each other. So you can do great virtual launches, which means you're reaching a national, and we've even had international audiences, and then you do a physical launch as well. Physical launches are very often a wonderful platform for the author, the family, their community, and the sales at those launches are good. They're a great starting point. Virtual launches, it's obviously a little harder to look at where the sales occur, but I'm sure that they do occur as a result of them. We also discuss the expectations and manage expectations with the author at that point. And as I say, Eileen will go more into that. We may or may not do a press release. That's quite a difficult one to balance because you can't inundate the media. Sorry, just switching off the phone. You can't inundate the media with press releases because they then may just start to ignore everything you send. So we've got to be careful about that. We will reach out to the main, so we would get Sunday Times is a good one, Media 24, the big radio stations, and we will try and place our interviews in the biggest audiences first. Jacket notes at Sunday Times is always a good one to get. An author profile with City Press is another great one to get. Interviews on TV. Our ENCA do a book slot. There are a few dedicated radio shows still left. So all of that is decided at the time and at the author meeting. We work obviously in conjunction with each other. We would previously have sent media copies out to the media. So we'll choose all the relevant media in conjunction with the author, and we'll send them review copies so that by the time the books are on the shelves, media would have probably had a chance to read it, maybe review it, although it's actually quite nice to keep the publicity period going for a longer stretch of time. So it's good to have it starting, obviously not before the books hit the shelves, but as the books hit the shelves, and then lengthen that as much as possible by spacing out interviews, by events, by having reviews published over a period of time. There is less free, what I call free space, and that is the media, interviews, reviews. And we are looking at ways of spending more, of doing giveaways, of having competitions, just to have more cover space in this very limited media space that we've got at the moment. And don't forget, we're also promoting, as Taz mentioned, our international people as well, although I think our local people take up a lot of our time and effort. We will select, as I said, select media to suit the book, and select media so that you or us as a publishing house rises to top of mind. So if, for example, John Latham or Pippa Hudson or any of the above have a space, they will phone us. I'm going to leave the rest to Eileen.
Great. Hi, everyone. Veronica, if you switch off your video, that would be good.
Hey.
So as Veronica introduced me, I am Eileen. I'm the publicist in Johannesburg, and we work together very closely. Usually we will almost work as one person. We reply to a lot of emails together, and it's really, as Alison said, all of us are working in publishing because we love books and we care about the authors. And so I'm going to talk about author care and about the relationships that we have to build with the authors and also with the media. Because despite loving a book, the most important thing is sales. And I saw there was a question about whether reviews do actually drive sales. And it's always very hard to judge that. But the more people who hear about the book, the more word of mouth there is. It definitely can. And sometimes a book that's a quiet bestseller happens because people review it and talk about how much they love it. So, you know, that we think it's important. So to build these strong relationships, what is important is trust and communication, and that goes across media and authors. With the authors, the relationship begins after the publishing team have kind of got the final book. They will hand the author over to us, and the publicity team kind of becomes your main point of contact. So a few months before the book comes out, we'll have a meeting with the author. And as Veronica said, this is where we kind of start the process of communication and understanding what the author wants to get done with the book, what their expectations are, helping them understand what's realistic. So if you've written a romance novel, you're probably not going to get an interview on carte blanche. We can also help the authors understand the sales and return process, because it is, you know, can be quite arcane if you're not in publishing. And so in this meeting, we can talk about who the author's contacts are, how we find the right position for the book, what will make it stand out with media, who the best person for them to talk to at a launch is, and also help them understand that this is what we do all day, so they can trust us to contact the media and make sure that the book gets the best coverage that it can. What we do sometimes find is that authors don't know it's not a good idea to go into a store and start shouting at them because you can't find your book. It's better to phone us and start shouting at us, and then we will pass that on to the right people and make sure that the books are in stock. So after the book releases, that's when the most publicity will happen in the first month. And then, as Veronica said, we kind of wanted to tail out over 3 months so that it's still kind of front of mind. And it's important for the authors to let us know if they get requests directly, but we'll also be in contact with the authors sometimes every day to talk to them about like interviews or new angles or what they think they could still do, and sometimes just to check in, and that all of that is about the relationship. And then the other relationship that we have to have is with the media. And the same way that it's important we have a good relationship with the authors, we have to have good relationships within the media. And this helps keep the PAN books and the authors that we represent sort of top of mind, and also so that they know if they need to fill a gap, they can get in touch with us and we will make a plan for them. So it's sort of about getting to know the journalists as people as well as the representative for their publication. Sometimes you might send them a book that you know they won't review, but that they will enjoy as a person. You might just give them a call if you've read a piece they've written and it's really great. It's very much like a relationship with a friend, but it's professional. And you want to make sure that you can contact them and that they know you're reliable. So if they need a cover quickly, you'll get it to them. If they need someone to interview at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, you will phone an author and beg them. And as Veronica said, sometimes what's more important is to not send them an email if it's an author that they won't cover, because then they can just start feeling like you're not being thoughtful about how you communicate with them. This is sometimes a danger because often the authors will have their own contacts. So the author might know the editor of a paper and might go above our heads. And that can really damage our relationship with the media, because then it feels like they are not being trusted. So again, that's why we have to communicate with the authors and collaborate and make sure that all of us are working kind of streamlined to get the book as much love as we can. And then just to add to Taz's comments about the social media question and blog tours, what we find is really, really important is for authors to work on their own social media, interact with people, interact with other authors, and be genuine. And I saw, Abella, your question about introverts. It is difficult. It really takes practice. And some authors even will hire a freelancer to help them with planning. But I'm going to show a video now from Dee, who's our social media coordinator, and she will cover that topic more fully. So, please bear with me.
Hello everyone, my name is Dee Milwa. I am the Digital Communications Coordinator. And I would say the most important aspect of my job, no, it's not checking what's trending on Twitter every hour, but it's really maintaining and making sure that PAN Macmillan's online presence is constantly growing and that we're constantly evolving and engaging and reaching new audiences and people in different ways. I also support the publicity of our authors and the books that we publish using social media platforms and other digital platforms such as our website. On a day-to-day basis, my role involves content creation, online community management, social media growth and engagement, and identifying new opportunities within the digital space that can help us, expand the publicity outreach. And I think for me, one of the most important things is also supporting the digital presence of not only our authors or the retailers and the booksellers that we work with, but also activities within the book publishing industry. PAN Macmillan has a strong presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have a combined online community of over 24,000 followers across all 3 platforms. We also have a LinkedIn page, which is to target the more business-orientated audience. And we use YouTube, SoundCloud, and recently started using. And I would say that social media has become such a crucial part of Penn Macmillan's publicity and marketing to a large extent. I mean, we use our platforms to engage with authors, to engage with book lovers, to give information on our books and the events that are happening in any just like industry news. Social media has had such a great impact in the publishing industry. And I think for me, one of the most important aspects that we need to note is how we no longer have an outsider in the publishing industry. We are seeing more and more people being curious about the process of writing a book, the process of publishing, getting a book printed and getting a book into stores. And I think for me, that's something very powerful that social media is also creating, that the access to information, you know, there's access to information, there's access to publishers, there's access to authors and booksellers, and just getting a sense of what is really this industry all about. So I think those are, for me, that's one of the most important things to note. But I mean, also the fact that books no longer exist in the bookstores or at our homes or between 5 to 10 people on a Saturday afternoon. They now have a huge platform and people and a dedicated online community that is holding space for conversations about books to happen, that is promoting books, that is talking about books. And I think for us as publishers, really social media is helping us gain new insights and learning about who are our readers, what are they buying, what do they like, what are they reading, where are they buying their books, where are they reading their books, you know, what is happening within their circles, what are some of the conversations. I would say social media is allowing for some of the most important conversations that are happening in publishing to happen, and, you know, for the discussion to reach, to be wider, for the discussion to not only live in, you know, the publishing companies, but for everyone to join in the conversation. I mean, conversations around diversity and inclusion in the industry, publishing more authors of color and minority groups. So there's really just a shift that is happening in the publishing industry, and at the core of that shift and at the core of those conversations is social media as a tool, as a platform. And I think which also brings me to the importance of engagement on social media. I like to look at social media, the importance of social media engagement in 3 varied ways. And that is engagement that we receive on the content that we put out there on our social media platforms, audience interaction, and social media listening. And I always say that, you know, when the online community or social media users tag you on a post, it means they are speaking to you. They are wanting a conversation with you. So it's important to go back and speak to them, whether it's with commenting, retweeting, or liking or resharing what they're saying. As much as how communities reshare, like, and comment on the content that we share as publishers and that authors share. So it's always for me a two-way street, and to engage in a meaningful way and really insert yourself in different groups. So I really cannot stress the importance of engagement.
I'm not sure what's happened there. We seem to have lost that video and Eileen, unfortunately. Eileen, shall I move on?
And I'm afraid it cut out there at the end. I think Dee was just saying the most important thing is engage with your followers.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. And because we're running a little over time, the next person that I'm going to introduce to you is Pascal Schmitz. And the reason that we asked Pascal to just come along and say a few things, say a few words, is because many authors talk about their dream of their book becoming a movie or becoming a television series or on Netflix. And we've worked over the years with IFA in particular on Pan Macmillan's film and television rights, and working with Pascal over various things. And you'll see behind him there that Happiness is a 4-letter word poster, which is, I think, stands out for South African readers as one of the most successful book to film adaptations. And we thought it would be just useful for you to hear from him. Pascal is the head of production and development at AAA Entertainment. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks, Pascal.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks so much for inviting me. Appreciate it. Yeah, so just a bit of background on ourselves. The company AAA Entertainment is a sales and distribution company that also does, we come from a production background, but we moved into sales and distribution of film in 2014. And what that means is that we take South African films and sell them to the rest of the world, to markets outside of Africa, or distribute them within Africa. For example, Happiness is a 4-letter word was one of the first films that we signed. We took that out and successfully managed to sell it in America to US networks, as well as put it on Amazon Prime and other platforms. And it has been really not only the most successful title and one of the most successful titles in South Africa, but also one of the most successful South African titles to do sales outside of the country and outside of the continent. So I'll talk a little bit to what we would be looking for in terms of books and what we call underlying IP for scripts, for adaptation into scripts, and to make into either filmed or television series. And what works and what is in demand and what really isn't and what doesn't work. So first of all, the game is changing quite drastically with the advent of video on demand platforms, VOD platforms, the streamers as they're called, and Netflix being the most obvious one. And you know, it's changing to a world where films and television series are being made straight to platform. They're bypassing the theatrical release window, which was traditionally the way that films would release. Like Happiness, it would go to cinema, and then from cinema, it would go to what we call transactional VOD, or in the old days, DVD, and then it would go to television networks, and then to streamers. Nowadays, a lot of films are going directly to streamers. I can let you know, because it's kind of official now, that Happiness, the sequel, will be going directly to Netflix, for example, and that'll be coming out in 2021 and will not release in cinema, but go straight to the streamer. And the reason they do that is in order to have absolute exclusivity, so that their subscribers that are paying for it are just getting it there. So what are they looking for? Well, the most popular genres right now that both Netflix and other buyers are looking for are really unanimously what works in cinema, what works for the streamers, what works on television. We can see the correlation between all the various platforms and end user consumption mechanisms are really the same. The most popular genres are, without a doubt, romantic comedies, romantic dramas, comedies, and action comedies. And that speaks a lot to the South African / African audience, because people here, audiences here, like light, entertaining, feel-good content. They're not attracted to sort of dark, heavy, message-filled content or political content. When it comes to film and television, people go to the cinema on a Friday or a Saturday evening you know, to go on a date, to go out with friends or whatever, and they want to be entertained. They want to see something really happy, go lucky sort of in its style. And so we find the same type of genres are successful time and time again. And they really revolve around that. Romance, especially because cinema is a form of sort of date night, going out with, you know, your date or your wife or your husband. And so people are usually looking for films that will enhance that experience, essentially. And so these are the type of genres that are working time and time again. I mean, Happiness is a four-letter word. In the year it came out in 2016, made 14 million rand at the box office, which is a very high for South African films. It was only beat that year, in fact, by a film called Pat Nou Jou Hart, which was an Afrikaans romantic comedy, which did 16 million rand at the box office. And those are incredibly high numbers. If you look at, for example, 2019's box office performance on South African films, the highest performing film that last year was Kandasami's The Wedding, which was a sequel to Keeping Up with the Kandasamis that did 19 million rand at the box office. Incredibly good number. The next highest grossing film, number 2, was Matwetwe, which did 6.5 million. And then Domini Tini, which did 4 million, and 3 Days to Go 3. And so it quickly descends down to number 10, Skemasom did 600,000 rand at the box office. So when you're doing above 10 million in South Africa at the box office, it's an incredibly great achievement. In fact, anything 5 million and above is considered a success story. And all of those films that have made in those ranges have been in those genres, really. Action comedy is a genre that is not made that often, and action is another genre that the platforms and broadcasters and theatricals really would like to have more of, but they're very expensive genres to produce, and so they don't get made that often, if at all. But certainly we as a sales company production entity are on the lookout for great action novels that could be adapted into films. But when we say action, it really means in a script that is every 7 pages, something is blowing up or somebody's getting hit in the face or jumping out of a car. That is sort of the definition of action as far as we're concerned. Netflix in particular likes movies that are based on books. They've actually expressed that to us as a company, as a corporation. That is one of their sort of aims, is to acquire or pre-buy or commission projects that are based on books. They do very much lean towards adaptations, and the reason for that is simply that if later down the line there's a sequel and it becomes a very successful franchise, and the producers and the platform no longer see eye to eye, they can go directly to the publishing houses and the authors to sort of contract in the IP and continue producing content based on that. Whereas if the script is an original, it usually then sits solely with the producer, the IP. So if we option and buy a script from a script writer, then we own that IP outright. But as a producer, I can never own the IP that is based on a novel, because the underlying IP belongs to the author. And the reason for that is because the book is a product that has already gone to market, and has its own commercial value, and the script or the movie is an adaptation of that product. Whereas if a script writer writes a script, it's kind of like a blueprint, an architect doing a drawing for a building. The drawing on its own is not a product. The script on its own is not a product. I can't sell the script directly to the consumer. I have to execute the script into a movie, into a product, and now it is a product that a consumer can buy for. And therefore, once I've executed that, depending on the contract done with the writer, as the producer, I would own that underlying IP. And if I'm then selling that IP or the film onto a network or a platform like Netflix, and they want to do more based on the characters in the world, which is the next thing I want to talk to, then essentially they have to deal with me. And if I suddenly get strange ideas of how this thing should carry on, and it's not very commercial anymore, or it's going to alienate the audience, or whatever the reason is that we're no longer on the same page, the producer and the platform, they have no choice. They cannot circumvent me because I own the IP. Whereas if it's a book, they can wait for the rights to lapse, and they can go and approach the author directly and pick up the rights there. So that's why by far and large, Netflix and other platforms prefer films and television series that are based on IP. And you'll be surprised, and if you do some research, how much of the content on Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, etc., is based on books. You know, you can rattle off a lot of them. If it's The Boys on Amazon, or if it's you know, what's going on Hulu, Handmaid's Tale. I mean, all of these successful television series are based on books. Very few of them are original concepts. So then what I mentioned just now in character and world of story, those are the elements from books that that we're really looking for. The story itself, or the plot, as we would call it in a script, is something that often will have to get adapted and changed from the original book, because a book is usually much longer. A film, for example, is a 90-minute, which is a 90-page script format. And so it requires a restructuring of the story from the book. And we often, you know, we just take out elements that don't work for us. Maybe things that are too dark, if we want to keep it light, will be changed, or we'll lose characters. We might have a book with 4 characters and it's just too many, and we'll just lose a character and go with 3. And the story changes accordingly. But it's the world of the story and the characters that are most interesting, that are really what we're looking for. And there's a tip when you're writing a book, is to give a lot of depth to the characters, a lot of background to the characters, because what we call these character Bibles when you're writing a script, these are the things that are very time consuming and difficult when you're writing a script, that are very advantageous when you have taken on a book to adapt, because the deeper the characters, the more believable they are, the more engaged the audience will be. And ultimately, franchises are successful when the characters are great and the world of the story is great. It's not the plot really that people come back for. They come back for characters. If we just take you know, a Breaking Bad, for example, a very successful TV series, it's the main character that people are coming for, you know, not necessarily the story. The story can go any which way. You can, you know, you can write outside of what the book had as a story in the continuation of the franchise. It's the character that people are interested in, what happens to the character and how the characters react to the story that is the plot. So character, very important. The more you develop the characters, the more insight you give audiences to the character, the better it is for an adaptation story, definitely. And then world of story, like I said as well, which is, you know, the fascination with whatever the world of the story is, whether it's, you know, a dystopic future world, or whether it's insight into a certain business world, or whether it's insight into certain cultures or groupings, you know. Those are the things that fascinate audiences. And then it's very important to know that we cannot do anything with books or stories that are not going to first and foremost be relevant and attractive to local audiences. So there's no way we can get a movie off the ground in South Africa that plays in South Africa with South African characters, target predominantly at American audiences. That does not work. American audiences will predominantly consume American content with American characters set in America. And if you're thinking that this film is, or this book is like a film that was very successful in the USA, well, that's because it's a US story. So if you're writing a South African book with South African characters, you have to first and foremost satisfy the South African audience. Once a film has proven success in the local market, it will then be able to travel outside of the local market and find audiences around the world. But it has to first be a hit here in the domestic market. And Happiness is a four-letter word is a very good example of that. It is still to date our best-selling film in our catalog, and it is also the film in our catalog that did the best in terms of its local success, financial success, both in the box office and thereafter in rentals and in television, etc., etc. So you have to have a story that is locally relevant. More and more Pan-African relevance is becoming a thing. So, you know, being able to travel outside of the border on the continent is also of great importance. South Africa has got the biggest subscriber numbers in pay television or SVOD like Netflix on the continent, but there are markets growing in other countries, and cumulatively they make up a sizable number now that that platforms and distributors are looking at. And so if your story is relevant for the rest of the continent, that helps as well in terms of making it an attractive proposition. Obviously, the best example of a highly successful local film based on a book would be Tsotsi. You know, that won an Oscar, that won the Oscar for foreign film that year, and went on to make you know, great sums of money for the producers and the owners of the IP on that. And obviously, when you win an Oscar, your film will be a huge success just by virtue of that, but you can't guarantee that. So a film like Tsotsi, if it had not won an Oscar, would not really have made a lot of money. I'm just gonna, at this point, address some questions that are coming up. So the first question is from Avela Chronomeyer. When it comes to managing author brand, what tricks and tools have worked well for writers who are introverts? There is a certain amount of giving of yourself that seems needed to gain traction on social media. I'm not sure if that is addressed to the previous speaker or to us, but when it comes to how we look for books, there's a couple of simple parameters. We're looking at the genres that I discussed. We look at traction the book has had commercially in the market. So obviously, if your book has sold a lot of copies, then more likely that the movie will sell a lot of cinema tickets. You know, that is the most, I would say, vital correlation to make. You know, the success of a book as a paperback, or, you know, in the market as a novel, as a book, will also correlate to its success in cinema. And so we would look at books that have done relatively well in the market. We would not be looking at books that have not published yet, or published in a very limited sense. We would want to see that there's some kind of an uptake. And for us, the brand of the author is not really that relevant, actually. You know, we're more interested in the story and looking that the story would make sense, and that the book has had some kind of traction in the market. Next question that came up is Mamo Kheti Molopiania asked a follow-up on Avela's on brand manager question about the social media. How do you do? Oh, I guess this is to the previous speaker.
I think they tend to be the more general questions. Yeah, thanks, Pascal.
Yeah. Okay.
That was absolutely fascinating. I think it's so important for people to have that kind of depth of perception in terms of what are the various genres that work, what are the various things that you look for. And I found it fascinating the discussion around you need to give your character as much depth as possible, because that actually makes your job in terms of a film adaptation that much easier. I guess it's so much easier just to envisage the character.
Absolutely, absolutely, and also helps us to create the plot that we need for the film. So if we know the character very well, then it's easy to ask the question, what would the character do in this situation? You know, if we need to change the story or the plot slightly, we could say, okay, if this had to happen, that doesn't happen in the book, how would this character react? And the better that we know the character, the more likely we'll be able to, you know, come up with that scenario and answer that question. But people are really more interested in character than anything else. Here's a question now that seems to be for me. Do you ever look at young adult as a genre, like say Riverdale and Netflix? Absolutely, young adult is definitely a genre we do look at. We are busy with a movie right now that is an adaptation of another movie that did very well in the Netherlands, and it is a high school drama. Not a lot of this has been made to date, but the theatrical distributors we work with are all very keen on it. It is a very big market per se, especially in cinema, because in the holidays, young adults, especially tweens, actually, ironically, so stories that are about teenagers and young adults actually appeal to younger audiences, and that happens in general. So your teenagers are generally watching adult content because they aspire above their age, and your 9 to 12-year-olds are generally watching teenage and young adult content because that's what they're aspiring to and looking up to and looking forward kind of to what's coming. And those type of films do very well in the market, but they always come from overseas. Nobody locally has been developing them, and we are busy adapting a Dutch format of a film that is a high school drama about a girl that comes back from Nigeria and goes back to school in South Africa, and then she was very cool and hip in Nigeria, and then she's labeled as a misfit, and sort of gets chucked into the loser group of people in the school. And it's just about high school, you know, sort of themes of the cool kids versus the dropouts or the misfits, basically. But that is definitely a genre that works in terms of on the streaming platforms and in cinema. And then family content is the last one that really, really is actually the top performing genre in general, that doesn't get much sort of airtime here, or that local producers are not making, and we're looking for a lot more. So we are currently actively looking for books or stories that are about that are family content. So they're either, you know, like about young children, and they appeal to the whole family, or just have family. So they're not, you know, they would be PG in their rating. They would appeal to intergenerational audiences. So films that you can watch with your kids and your parents, basically, if you're a 30-something, 40-something year old, you know. Those are extremely rare, but extremely in demand. And that's something we are at AAA are actively currently looking for to adapt, because we have not found anything yet. And they need to be African stories, of course. Okay. For Pascal, what role does the author play in the film adaptation? How much influence do they have in the outcome? That really depends on the relationship between the author and the producers. If it's the first time we're working with an author, we would contractually make sure that we have all rights, and the author can sort of play a role in terms of getting each script and giving their comments, but not having any kind of veto on the script, because as much as an author may be brilliant at writing stories, we know what we're doing in terms of making films, and we know what works for the market and what doesn't. And so we need to have the absolute last final say. The more we would work with an author, the more interactive that role would become. But generally, the contracts that we do mean we give the author every draft of the script to look at, and they can comment and give their feedback, and we will take it into consideration before writing the next draft. And that depends on the turnaround time as well. I mean, sometimes we get a draft of a script, we give input, and a week later, the writer is writing the next draft. And if the author hasn't come back within a week, well, then unfortunately, we have to move on, because we sign an 18-month option agreement, and that's 18 months to go into production, which is a very tight timeline for us, because it takes usually 3 to 6 months to develop the script till it's ready. And then we have to do a packaging around, budget it, and then go for financing, raise the money, which is another 6 months, so, generally we can't really afford to sit and be waiting for an author to come back to us, and maybe they're busy and they're traveling or whatever, they're writing another book. So generally there's a voluntary kind of exchange, I would say. Then Melina asked, awesome, how does one get one's book to people who make movies? Just send us your book. You can go to our website. I'll put it on the comments here. It's www.aaa-entertain.com. And you can just send us a PDF or a link to your book, and we'll just look at the synopsis and the genre and let you know if it's of interest. And then we'll have one of our readers read the book and tell us whether or not it would work as a movie. And then there's another question from Avela. You've shared what commercial success is for movies in South Africa. What does that translate to for the author? Well, essentially, we do an option agreement on these scripts. And so once the film goes into production, then there is a fee that we pay to the publisher. We don't deal directly with the author, actually. We deal with the publisher or with the agent. But there would be a fee paid, obviously, of the majority of that would go to the author. And then there would be some kind of a profit share back end as well, which means that once the film has recouped its initial outlay in terms of the production budget and the investors have been paid back, then the profit, there would be a share of that profit going back to the publishing house. So if the film is very successful and it's made a lot of profit, then the author would end up getting a share of that. And the sequels, the real success is when something does really well, is that you can carry on making more films and start merchandising, potentially making TV series, making video games, whatever else you can imagine out of that same IP. And the author would obviously be benefiting from all of those, because the central start IP, as I explained, belongs to that, that author essentially.
Pascal, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much. I think It's also useful to add that in your publishing agreement as an author, some authors choose to actually reserve the film and television rights for themselves. So they're not always included in a publishing contract, a publishing agreement with an author. And that's, often based on kind of personal preference. And we are very open to negotiation with authors in terms of how they'd like to handle that side of things. And thank you for those details. That's great. And we really appreciate your input.
Sure.
And if there are any other questions that come up for you specifically, we'll definitely make a plan to get them to you. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks. And I'm very excited to welcome Aoife Lennon Ritchie. One of the questions that has been asked is, how do you get your South African books how can they gain traction overseas and internationally? And Sandile did discuss some of those options with you in terms of where the publisher is able to put a book onto Lightning Source or print on demand, or your ebook is available. But obviously first prize for an author is when we are able to sell rights to a particular title. And Aoife is a literary agent who's based in Cape Town. She can tell us a little bit about her agency and herself. But it is someone that Pan Macmillan works with on certain of our titles that we identify as might having international potential.
Well, good morning. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Andrea. Yes, so I'm a literary and rights agent, and I work direct with some authors. And I also work with publishing houses, Pan Macmillan being one of them. Andrea had asked me to explain a little bit about how that's different. So when I work with an author, the process starts much earlier. So I will work with an author when maybe they'll come to me, or an author that I've already signed. they will often come to me with ideas before they start writing. And then we'll have a chat about what we feel they'll be able to achieve and what we think I can sell. So my job is to sell rights in the book, both locally and overseas, and also film rights to people like Pascal, who's just been on there. So my job is to know the market here and overseas, and to have relationships with scouts, co-agents in other territories, and direct with editors and publishers in the rest of the English-speaking world. With a book that's already been published by Pan Macmillan, for example, I get the book when it's done. It's all edited, and it's got a cover, and it's got some reviews sometimes. The author's already got their platform up and running. So I'm handed a package that's shiny and beautiful and ready to go. So it is very different. I should say that I don't take all of the shiny packages, so I don't work with the entire list of a publisher. I just take the books that, as other people have talked about earlier, everybody has to be passionate about the book they're selling. So I take the books on that I love, that I have to take on, and also books that I think that I can add value to by selling rights. So the books then come to me, and then I sell them. I pitch them to editors, to producers increasingly. And also I have a lovely team of wonderful co-agents around the world who know their market. And often that will be in translation. So they will know, for instance, I have a lovely co-agent in China who knows who to pitch books, and then she'll help me with the contract because she will know what the local law. That's another thing an agent does, is we negotiate contracts for you. So we make sure that you're protected, that you can get into an agreement with the publisher or a subsidiary rights person, effectively, that you're well represented, and also you can get out if the relationship falls down or if the book stops selling. So that's sort of the big, oh yes, one other big difference is one thing that I do have to do when I'm selling a package book that's already been published is to also have a good enough relationship with editors overseas that I can explain to them that it is still changeable, it's still editable. So if it doesn't quite work for their market, it's not set in stone. So one example would be Angela McCalva's wonderful The Blessed Girl, which was a super hit here. That book was sold to Bloomsbury in the UK and worldwide, but the editor was concerned with the ending because the ending for this market was quite dark. So we were able to negotiate with her and with Angela and obviously Andrea, who owned the rights in the book, that Angela should rewrite the ending for the international market. And Angela did an amazing job. She whipped it out in record time, created, she worked through the entire book so that she could set up this new ending, which made it completely international. And then that's been a huge success for Bloomsbury, and it was recently shortlisted for the Comedy and Women in Print Prize in the UK. It was a huge success.
I think one of the other things, maybe just to talk to you a little bit, Aoife, is about the time that this process takes, because authors are often very impatient. They want to know, when are they going to get some results? And I think maybe if you can just chat a little bit about the 1 or 2 international fairs that you go to and specifically speak to people. And then just in terms of the time frame, I'm thinking of something like Fiona Snicker's Lacuna, for example, Gail Schimmel, those are our authors. But yeah, that would be great if you could talk to that a little.
Yeah, well, I would really like to have a minimum of a year, but sometimes books take longer. And the reason that is because whenever I get the book, I'll start talking to people about it. I make sure the scouts know about it and the co-agents. And then I'll do a very targeted approach to editors who I think will really love the book. So I'll know who's acquiring what, who's looking for what, and then I'll pitch to them, and it can take a long time. And then also I'll go to the book fairs. So there's a book fair in London, there's one in Frankfurt, all virtual at the moment. Also film festivals, I go to as many film festivals overseas and locally as I can to try and get the books into the right hands. one thing that's important to know is that a lot of the international publishers, when they're looking at a book that they would consider a small book, so often very local South African books might be considered small books to them. They're not gonna print 150,000 copies necessarily. They might. So they will want to see that the book has done well in its own market. So they'll want to see not necessarily sales, because sales here are very small, but they'll want to see good reviews, and they'll want to see that it's been maybe nominated for a few prizes if the prizes are appropriate for the genre. And then they'll want to see that other people are interested in other territories. So I have lots of co-agents in territories who are sitting, waiting on books. They know that they're going to sell them, but the publisher that they know will buy the book won't be the first to buy the book. So they'll have to wait and see that the book has sold in maybe 1 or 2 or 3 other territories first, and then they'll jump on. So that's something that takes a lot of time as well. And a lot of the co-agents and the fairs, they have cycles. So people will expect to be receiving books now in January, February, ordinarily the London Book Fair is in March, but this year it's been moved to June. June, July is a time when people take holidays. It's very hard to pitch then, because you might send it to someone and they love it, but the person in sales who needs to approve the book is on holiday, and then the salesperson comes back and they're on holiday, and then they come back August, September, and maybe the book it's a little older in their mind, maybe, and it's not as pressing to get that book signed. So I tend to pitch a lot early in the year, and then after the summer holidays, and then again September, October. Coming up to this time of year, it's getting a little late. I do have a few books that I'm still pitching now, but people are exhausted now at the end of the year, and they're all trying to get through all of their submissions lists and try to get through everything for the end of the year and start fresh in January. So for those reasons, it can take a long time. But Lacuna and Gail's book, The Accident, so those books sold after several years. So that was a question of just being tenacious with books. And again, this feeds back into, you have to love the book. You have to be so passionate about the book that you're selling. Otherwise, it's very hard to sustain enthusiasm and keep talking about these books, possibly years after they've been published in South Africa. So patience is definitely, it does take an awful long time. And then once it gets picked up overseas, then it can take 1.5 years, 2 years before it's published there. So it can be a very long process. Sometimes it's quick, and sometimes a book will get picked up in several territories at once, even before it comes out here. But often it takes a lot longer.
And I think that's quite an important point just to make, because I think in South Africa, we tend to work with a much shorter lead time on books. You know, if I sign up a book in September of one year, I'm generally considering publishing it the following year. Whereas in our experience of international publishers, and you've just echoed that, sometimes they're working 18 months to 24 months in advance. So it can be, it is an exercise in patience and in tenacity. Would you say, Aoife, just I think as a final question, that the kind of global events of the last, 8-9 months, the kind of Black Lives Matter and other issues like that have affected what international publishers are looking for in terms of content?
Absolutely. And actually especially the Own Voices movement. There was a big furore in the States earlier this year about American Dirt, which is a book written from the point of view of a Mexican immigrant, but it was written by a white woman. And there was uproar because there were, obviously lots of Mexican women who had a similar experience and had written books who couldn't get the books published. And so there was this correct uproar about, why are you publishing this book and not a book from a Mexican woman? And this is sort of, something that I've always tried to champion, diverse voices, stories that aren't widely told overseas, and my focus is very much overseas. So for me, it's been the Own Voices movement has been a great boon. It's really made it a lot easier to have a conversation about South African and African fiction. And this also feeds into another point that lots of people have touched on. Alice and Lyra, I think, talked about it, and Pascal. And it's about a specific sense of place and identity. So I think a lot of authors fall into the trap of trying to write a book that they feel will be palatable by an American readership or a UK readership. And so they try to make it so that it could be set anywhere. But my experience is that those books actually don't do as well as a book with a very specific sense of place and a very specific local voice. Because in the specific come the universal themes. And it's the specific and very local and very, I suppose, deep depiction of character, place, and voice that really get people emotionally involved in your book and your story. So the own voices, the Me Too, all of that has definitely made my job a lot easier, because I want to sell local books from local writers who don't necessarily have a voice overseas. And so this has been wonderful. Also, the fact that with COVID, publishers really struggled to sell books, but I'm noticing a real trend now for, as other people also mentioned, for books that are uplifting. People want to read happy stories that make them cry and laugh, but ultimately leave them feeling uplifted. And so there's a lot of demand for books, for commercial books like that, which is great for this morning's session.
Thanks, Aoife. That was really fascinating. Really appreciate your kind of insights. And obviously we've had some wonderful successes for our authors. But again, I think one of the things just to emphasize is patience, because again, it might not be your first novel that is the one that finds a sympathetic ear in another editor situated overseas. Or it might be that actually your book is not suitable necessarily for publishing overseas, but that we find some kind of film interest. So we really appreciate you sharing your insights. And again, if there are any kind of specific questions that come up for you, we'll be sure to get your input and your answers. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. And then I'm very excited to introduce to you all Angela McCulwer. You've heard a lot about Angela over the course of this morning's commercial fiction workshop, and that is because Angela is Pan Macmillan's most successful local author, and I think she can hold her own. Her storytelling abilities, the characters that she creates certainly provide a lot of buzz, and we have published 5 books with Angela and looking forward to many, many more. But we wanted you just to hear from someone firsthand what it is like being that commercial fiction author and being someone who has found success, but didn't necessarily created a buzz, yes, with her first novel, Red Ink, but didn't necessarily see the sales. But by the time we are working on Critical But Stable, Angela's most recent release, you know, we're looking at a substantial first print run, and we're celebrating the fact that Angela is a brand author for Pan Macmillan. Over to you, Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be part of this session. So I've got a bit of an inkling of who else is participating in the talk. So I'll try and just keep my talk as simple and just down to the point as possible. So my journey, my writing journey began in 2007. You know, I had started writing a biography because I'm a former journalist, and I'd been in talks with somebody who was incarcerated at the Pretoria maximum security prison. He was a serial killer. I was supposed to write his biography. You know, as I interacted with him, it became clear to me that that was not going to happen. I basically decided to abandon that project. And I met a publisher who encouraged me to fictionalize my interactions with this man. And so that's how Red Ink came to be. But because I was trained as a journalist, I was nervous to write a novel. I felt that I was not up to the task. So I enrolled for a writing course, which is something that I do recommend, not only just to be able to master your craft. But also what I loved about being part of that course was that I met up with other aspiring writers. And what I take out from that experience is having other writers peer review your work, because from that process, I discovered that, first of all, I actually do have a strong writing voice. This is kind of the feedback that I get as we shared our writing, and it actually spurred me on to be confident enough to then submit a first draft to a publisher. And when I submitted my first draft, it was, I received a response almost immediately. I think about a few weeks later, so I was quite excited. And then silence for many months. And of course, now I was nervous, as Andrea correctly says, that most of us writers want to see results. We, when you put your work out to the world, you're always, there is a sense of insecurity that perhaps it's only you and your friends and your mother who actually enjoys your writing, which sometimes is the case. So of course, when you hand it over to somebody in publishing, you want to know whether this is the step that's going to make or break your writing career. So I was rejected by this publisher, and I took it very badly, because I actually thought that it was testament to the fact that I'm not supposed to be a published novelist. So I actually kind of abandoned the writing, and I just chopped it up to, okay, this is not the path that my life is going to take. So the reason I'm speaking specifically about rejection is because I actually think it's quite important for a writer to understand that, rejection can be part of the process and to not be discouraged by it. I mean, this year's Man Booker Prize winner is Douglas Stewart, and his book, which won the Man Booker Prize for 2020, Shaggy Bane, was rejected 32 times. So I think it's important when you're taking your manuscript around, first of all, as I think somebody mentioned earlier, to know what publishers are looking for. We've got different publishing houses in South Africa, and they're not all necessarily looking at commercial fiction, for instance, or if you're writing literature, there are publishing houses that specifically want to push works of high literary kind of quality. So, and beyond that, before you press send, before you send that manuscript to whomever, whichever publisher or editor, is the importance of rewriting your first draft, because I can guarantee you that your first draft, no matter how incredibly talented of a writer you are, that first draft has lots of plot holes maybe that you haven't picked up, lots of errors that crept in because you became carried away with the work. You were just enjoying the narrative so much that you kind of lose track of certain things, certain inconsistencies. So I just believe in writing, reading, rewriting as much as possible, even before I send to a publisher or an editor, knowing that there are still many drafts that will be part of that process. So I think just the humility to understand that as much as you may love your work, but there's a lot of work to be done before, it's appreciated by the wider public. And then beyond that, just some highlights of my, journey in publishing. I think the biggest moment for me is when I walked into a bookstore and saw copies of Red Ink on a bookshelf. It was incredible. It was almost like an out-of-body experience, and I was quite excited. And I fell in the trap that has been discussed of then going to different bookstores and wanting to see my books and not understanding when it's no longer on the shelves. And, and then you hear booksellers telling you that it's it's been sold out, and you get excited because you're thinking, oh my goodness, a big check is coming. No, it's sold out because booksellers normally order small quantities, especially if you're a debut novelist. And so, and that alludes to the idea of obviously limited shelf space and all of that. So a lot of what it takes to be a sane debut novelist is humility, because there's a lot of things that will create expectations in you. Even the issue of, having, for instance, your book opted for screenwrites or screenplay. You get excited because you're thinking, my goodness, we're going to be going to the cinemas, it's going to be incredible. But that process also takes far longer than you would anticipate. I mean, I remember I'm friends with Nozizwe Jele, Happiness is a Four-Letter Word. And I remember she was optioned, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years, I stand to be corrected, before the book was finally this big hit. So do pace yourself and manage your own expectations in this journey, because a lot of, big announcements tend to take quite a long time to turn around into whatever the thing is, whether it's an international deal or a screenplay adaptation and all of that. So yeah, do pace yourself. And then the issue of putting yourself out there as an author is a crucial one, because the positive aspects of where we are right now in publishing in South Africa is that there are quite a few authors coming up. There is a bit of we are facing a resurgence of interest in South African literature specifically, and there's quite a few people writing. So the space is becoming much more competitive than when I started in 2007. And obviously there's writers who are extroverted, who are willing to talk about their books and, on different platforms and at live events and things like that. And I know a lot of writers are also very introverted. And I think it's important, even if you're an introvert, to establish some kind of public presence for your brand. I know we hate calling ourselves brand as writers, but for your brand. And so if the best that you can do is maybe just post a lot on social media, and you don't have to post about your life. It doesn't have to be about you and your boyfriend and your kids and your cats and whatever. If you're a private person, you can still maintain that privacy that means a lot to you. But you can post certainly about, your writing process. You can post about, you respond when you get tagged. Post about, upcoming interviews and things like that. So you can actually maintain that sense of privacy without feeling like you are giving too much of yourself away to the public. And the other thing that was a bit of a shock to me as well, even though I am accustomed to public speaking because of the work that I do, is the idea of now going to literary festivals, speaking to large groups of people, sometimes 200 people. It's one of the moments when I thought, oh no, this is not what I signed up for. I'm not a public speaker. I don't feel comfortable speaking about my work because it's so dear to me. And I feel that if somebody, for instance, says a negative comment about one of my books, I don't know if I can handle it. So it's just one of those things that I guess get easier with time, and it takes practice. It's always useful to, kind of think through what it is you want to say, on that platform, whether it's a literary festival or a television interview, whatever it is important to get used to the idea that by virtue of your book being in the public domain, you are somewhat of a public figure now. You are no longer the solitary writer behind a laptop and typing away and, dreaming of these lived lives and characters and so on. So it's kind of inevitable now, especially in the era that we're in, that you do have to share a bit of yourself with the world, which I know is unfortunate for some of us. What else? Finding the right publisher that's the right fit for you, your work, your personality. I mean, one of the things that I think a publisher could rightly have concerns about with regards to me is that as much as I write a lot of crime fiction, but for instance, a book like The Blessed Girl, you cannot categorize it as a thriller or, crime writing. So I am not I'm not a very classic genre writer. Because of the type of work I love to read, the kind of literature I like to read, which is a lot of murder mysteries, thrillers, that's who I am. I do get influenced by that style of writing. So my chapters are usually short and sharp, lots of cliffhangers. So even when I'm not writing crime necessarily, like The Blessed Girl, you do find the stylistic elements of crime writing coming into that book where, every chapter kind of keeps you wondering what's going to happen next. So, so even though publishers tell us to at least try and find a genre that we can identify with, especially as part of this brand building process, I think if you can take risks, because obviously, you write what you love. Writing is a labor of love. You can't write to commission. I can't write to commission most of the time. So it's important to maybe find a specific style that is intrinsically you. And then when you do take risks outside of what you've been identified with, know the rules so that when you break them, you know what you're doing. You understand that I'm breaking the rules, but I know this is working because I can see how this would appeal to somebody who's read, kind of my previous work, even though it's not necessarily in the same genre. So, yeah, I think those are the big things. It's do not fear rejection. Be ready to be available to the world, which might not necessarily be your plan, but it's just because a book can't just sell itself. And manage your expectations, because the journey is amazing, it's rewarding, but a lot of things do kind of take long to actually, reach fruition. And yes, I think that is my short and sweet talk. Let me see if there's any questions here. Angela.
Sorry, Angela, the one thing you haven't spoken about is how much hard work and revision of drafts is involved. And I think it's very useful for people to have a sense that your first draft is not your last draft. So maybe you could speak to that just for 1 minute.
Yes. Yeah, I tried to cover it in the beginning when I was saying that, first of all, before you send your first draft to an editor or to your publisher, you are going to need to do a number of first drafts before you even send it out to the world, because writing is a creative process, you do get kind of lost in it. And so a first draft is very much a rough draft. What I do is actually print it out because I can see my errors kind of scream out from the pages when they are on paper, but that's just me. I'm probably old school that way. But I think if I were an editor, the one thing I would not want to see is just a grammar-ridden, error-ridden, plot holes everywhere first draft. And I think that's why a lot of people tend to get rejected, because we think it's so brilliant. Even if you've done it, maybe you've written about 2 drafts of it or 3 drafts of it, and you think it's amazing, and you haven't even given it maybe to somebody else to read, and you just ship it off and expect to hear the rave reviews that you've been hearing in your head. Be brutal with the editing process, your own editing process. Be brutal to yourself, because it does take a lot to actually write something that will captivate somebody, especially a reader who is quite, picky and finicky, which is what I assume all readers are. I always assume that if I'm writing a scene about a medical procedure, there's a doctor who's reading that and who's looking for the errors I'm going to make, because obviously I'm not a surgeon or a medical doctor. So research a lot. Don't take anything for granted. Don't base, don't capture words or scenes or a plot based on what you've seen on TV and it worked, and it's probably how police procedure goes or whatever. Take the extra effort to not only research online. If you have to write a chapter on something that pertains to police procedure, speak to a cop and say, is this what cops do? If this were the scenario, is this what a cop would do? It's your own self-editing. And then once now you've engaged with a publisher, they've assigned an editor to you, expect that process to be rigorous, expect it to be even more rigorous than your own kind of self-editing, because now the publisher is your second pair of eyes, and she's going to see, or he's going to see, all the things that you thought were so brilliant. And some of them may be brilliant, but because it's your work, that inability to self-critique obviously will creep in. And so trust and work with an editor that you trust. If an editor doesn't understand, for instance, maybe cultural things, cultural aspects that you bring into your manuscript because you're writing from your cultural background, either speak to the editor and say, no, this is actually what we do. It sounds crazy, but this is what happens in a burial or whatever it is. Or I think my character, and if you believe in something, fight for it. My character would act like this because of X and Y reasons. So have confidence in your writing and your world that you're creating, but at the same time, allow that interaction to happen with the editor, because both of you, even though sometimes it might not seem like it because maybe you feel so strongly about something, but both of you have the same end in mind, which is to deliver a beautiful, work of literature, whether you're a literary writer or a commercial writer. So the goal is the same. And so you are allowed to fight for what you want, but at the same time, do have the ear to receive the critique. Don't be too bullish about, oh, no, I know this better than anybody else, because you need that second pair of eyes. That's kind of like your reader's eyes as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Angela. We really appreciate you sharing your insights. We are so proud to be your publisher. We're celebrating Critical but Stable at the moment, but we look forward to many more bestsellers from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm reading some of the questions. I don't know if we have time for me to take, I think, 2 of them that have just popped up.
Sure, but you'd need to keep it quite brief because we're needing to wrap up soon.
On the timelines that need to be considered. In a way, books compete with streamers in a culture of new releases, binge watching, or I think, no, this is probably do you feel that the industry might have a relook speed to market? I don't know. I think this could be a Pascal question. For Angela, what's your writing process like? Oh my goodness. It usually starts with an idea, a bare bones of a premise for a new book. And then I start writing from where I'm sitting here in my study. And I do a lot of research, as I said, online. I speak to people. And I start with kind of a character Bible, because a lot of my books are character driven. And plot as well. I do tend to have kind of a rough draft of how I want the book to end. Normally, none of my books have ended the way that I thought they were going to end. And then I write, I get started. I write at night most of the time because I've got a day job. I write at cafes, restaurants, hotels. I never write in the office because the office just seems like a different world altogether. It feeds another part of my life completely. So it's strange that I can never ever write in the office. But yeah, that's basically me. And I don't listen to music. I wish I was one of these cool people who write to jazz or to some amazing music, but alas, I prefer silence. Because I really do get lost in that world.
That's great. Thanks, Angela. I think you have spoken already to the next question in terms of your recalibrating, working closely with an editor, fighting for what you really feel strongly about in terms of plot or character, but also having that ear that allows you to listen to what someone who's external and who's coming to the story has to say. And just a final word of thanks to everyone who's given of their time. A thank you to those authors who were shortlisted for our manuscript submission process and who have spent some time with us today. A big thank you to All About Writing. We did a seminar with All About Writing earlier this year on answering your publishing questions. They've been a valuable partner to us, and even more so because what Sibongile is going to close off with is we've got 3 book hampers that were up for a lucky draw for those shortlisted people who had taken part in our manuscript submission process. And then the final prize that we were drawing as a lucky draw prize is an All About Writing online course. We're very grateful to them for sponsoring it, and the successful, or the winner of that prize will be in touch with you to share the details and to allow you. That's a course that will be happening in 2021 when All About Writing run their next quite comprehensive, it's over several weeks. But Sibongile, over to you as the person who has overseen the lucky draws and has done much of the work in putting this commercial fiction workshop together, for which I want to thank you, and also to thank Sandile for her input, Eileen for all of her behind the scenes work on it all. It's been really fabulous with very few technical hitches, which we are all grateful for. Luckily, it's not this time last week when Pan Macmillan's internet wasn't working for the day. And thanks to everyone. Please feel free to send us any questions. We will, this is part of an ongoing process, and keep writing, most importantly, and keep submitting. That's great. Over to you, Sibongile.
Hi, sorry, I didn't realize my mic was on when I screamed that yes, but yes, keep writing. So the 3 book hampers, the people who have won is Korisha Dawood, Ferial Mohammed, Kirsten Clark, and finally the person who has won the writing course is Tina Chiwashira. I'll be in touch with all of you via email to get your delivery details and so forth, and Tina to give you more details on that course. Thank you so much to the Pan Macmillan team. Thank you to all the panelists that gave of their time and valuable insight. Thank you to the people who joined us from media groups to friends of Pan Macmillan, whether as bloggers, whether as stakeholders in a different capacity. Thank you to our freelancers that are also on board. Some of them have been assisting us in answering some of your questions or giving advice in the chat. We really appreciate that. And even to our other authors who have the manuscripts in review with us, thank you for joining us. We hope you also found this useful. And to all of you and the shortlisted candidates, please do keep writing. And as Andrea said, we hope to have similar kind of discussions, whether it's through our platforms or joining somebody else on another panel. But it's very important for us to make publishing more accessible to more people and get as many authors published as possible, even though we may not be able to publish all of them ourselves. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a lovely day further. Bye. I wish you could all be on video and say bye, because it feels like I'm talking to myself a little bit. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Take care.